broadcasters are too afraid to ask. To MPs, to union leaders, to striking workers. And I'll also be talking as well to a mum who has had to miss a hospital appointment to look after her kid today. Hard to justify, isn't it? Also, more deadly asylum seeker madness. A failed Iranian asylum seeker who should have been removed from the UK years ago is being sentenced today for brutally killing an elderly woman who had given him a home. How many more innocent people have to die before something is done about this? Our Home and Security editor will have the very latest. And shop prices? Well, they're at record highs. It's all light-hearted stuff today, ladies and gents, let me tell you. After record accelerated inflation, with a warning that the peak is yet to arrive. Get in touch with me, you wonderful people, as you always do. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Look, I want solutions, not problems today, as my old manager used to say to me. I want solutions, not problems. How do we end the strikes? And should failed asylum seekers be deported immediately, OK? Two big ones for you. gbviews@gbnews.uk. I will be back the other side of these headlines.
Good afternoon. 2 minutes past 3, I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. Hundreds of thousands of workers are taking part in Walkout Wednesday, the biggest day of industrial action for more than a decade. Up to 500,000 workers belonging to 7 trade unions have walked out over pay, jobs and conditions. Border Force officers and bus and train drivers have caused widespread travel disruption and thousands have marched on Whitehall. Teachers from the National Education Union are on strike, leaving 85% of schools fully or partially closed. Education Secretary Gillian Keegan told us a deal is some way off.
They didn't break down, but they basically said very clearly, look, we can't do anything to stop this strike. This is going ahead on the 1st of February, but we do have 28 days between this and the next strike, so we will continue those discussions. But what we can't do is offer inflation busting, pay rises, because we're really focused on getting inflation down and halving the inflation for everybody, so we all feel better and have more money in our pockets.
Well, Kevin Courtney is the General Secretary of the National Education Union. He says the government needs to find the money.
They never thought we'd reach these thresholds. They weren't planning on us reaching them. And since we've reached the thresholds, 40,000 more people have joined the union as well. So it does show there's a huge strength of feeling in the profession that government must act and put things right. I think Gillian Keegan is hoping that the strike won't be effective and there won't be any further action. There could be further action. She needs to do a deal so that that doesn't happen.
Well, amidst the ongoing strikes, the Trades Union Congress has handed a petition to Downing Street opposing the government's plans for a new law on minimum levels of service during strikes. The petition against the so-called Strikes Bill was signed by more than 200,000 members of the public. TUC General Secretary Paul Nowak says he hopes the ongoing strikes will send a strong message to the government of the anger that the public is feeling.
Trying to push through what is a particularly spiteful piece of legislation. Now, we've had hundreds of thousands of public sector workers take strike action, quite often for the first time ever, and instead of listening to the concerns of those workers or responding to the concerns, the government has just tried to introduce legislation to make it more difficult for them to take that strike action. So I think the government should be more responsible, should talk to their workforce, should talk to unions and come to the table on public sector pay.
Well, in other news, the Prime Minister has denied being too weak to root out sleaze from the government. Sir Keir Starmer made the claim at PMQs, citing a string of recent allegations. He said Rishi Sunak must have known about HMRC's investigation into Nadeem Zahawi's tax affairs at the time that he was appointed as party chair. He also accused Mr Sunak of forcing people to work for a bully.
Deputy Prime Minister was facing 24 separate allegations of bullying. According to recent reports, some of the complainants were physically sick. One says they were left suicidal. How would he feel if one of his friends or relatives was being forced to work for a bully simply because the man at the top was too weak to do anything about it?
Well, the Prime Minister responded by saying that Sir Keir Starmer had supported the spread of hate whilst Jeremy Corbyn was Labour leader.
When I was made aware of formal complaints, I instructed a leading independent KC to conduct an investigation because I take action when these things happen. But what did he say at the weekend? He said at the weekend that hate had been allowed to spread unchallenged in the Labour Party under his predecessor. He was speaking as if he wasn't even there. But he was sitting right next to him, supporting him for 4 long years.
UK house prices have fallen for the 5th month in a row, down by 0.6% on December. Nationwide's house price index shows that the average UK home now costs just over £258,000. Annual growth in prices slowed to 1.1% in January, that's compared to 2.8% in December. It comes as the Bank of England is poised to raise interest rates for the 10th consecutive time. Well, a further 1,500 patients of a convicted breast surgeon are being recalled so their treatment can be investigated. Ian Patterson was handed a 20-year prison sentence in 2017 after he was convicted on 17 counts of wounding people with intent. Over 14 years, he subjected more than 1,000 patients to unnecessary and damaging operations in the West Midlands. The new patients were discovered after a trawl through old IT systems. And we bring you some breaking news just coming in. The US Justice Department is searching President Joe Biden's home in Delaware as part of an official investigation into classified documents. That's according to his lawyer. Now, this is a developing story. We'll bring you updates as soon as they come in. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, let's get straight back to Patrick.
Yeah, I want to get stuck straight into Walkout Wednesday today, ladies and gentlemen. The one benefit of everyone being stuck at home should be that the ratings will be good because you're all glued to your TV. So let's crack straight on, shall we? Hundreds of thousands of workers have walked out today on what is the biggest day of strike action the UK has seen for decades. Teachers in England and Wales, represented by the National Education Union, have walked out. Ahead of the strikes, it was estimated that around 85% of schools in those two countries would be fully or partially closed. University lecturers have also joined train drivers, civil servants, bus drivers and security guards, with an estimated 500,000 workers walking out in increasingly bitter disputes over pay, jobs and conditions. Protesting outside the Cabinet Office, one civil servant striker said that she was terrified of being made homeless.
It is not uncommon for our colleagues to have to use food banks to survive. When I was sort of organising for the ballot, I was talking to members who were crying to me on the phone because they didn't know how they were going to feed their families. They didn't know how they were going to make rent. This is not a sustainable situation. We have to be able to eat. We have to be able to live. I'm always worried that one crisis is just going to leave me homeless. I'm literally one paycheck away from homelessness.
Yes, OK. Well, there we go. That was 31-year-old Ellie Clark speaking outside the Cabinet Office there. Now, throughout the course of the show today, I'm going to be talking to union reps, MPs, ordinary members of the public as well. And frankly, asking some of the questions that I think a lot of the other broadcasters do shy away from. Pensions is a big one, especially when it comes to teachers. You very rarely hear that asked, do you? But let's cross live now to the picket lines. Our Northern Ireland reporter, Dougie Beattie, is with striking university staff in Belfast. Our national reporter, Ellie Costello, is at a teachers' rally in London. Lisa Hartle, our London reporter, is with train drivers. And our political reporter, Olivia Utley, is, of course, in her natural habitat outside Downing Street. So let's bring them all up. I think we got Ellie first, actually. Ellie Costello, there you go. Thank you very much, Ellie. Great to have you on board. Right, so what's going on where you are?
Well, good afternoon, Patrick. Well, there's actually a huge clean-up operation going on here in Whitehall in London. There was a huge rally here by the National Education Union, and I'll say it's a huge rally because the NEU, they were expecting about 10,000 people to be here this afternoon. They say it turned out to be more like 40,000 teachers and their support staff. They came with their musical instruments, they came with their dogs, they came with their placards. It's fair to say it pretty much was a carnival atmosphere. And the walk started over in Regent Street in central London and came down to Westminster. It took over a mile, and we were told that there were people here at Whitehall, and they were still continuing to start back at Regent Street. So that just gives you a sense of how many people were here. There were talks going on the stage behind me demanding an inflation-busting pay rise. They want something in the line of about 10 to 11%. Kevin Courtney of the National Education Union said this is the largest teachers' strike since the 1980s. And I was speaking to many of the teachers here, telling them that a lot of the public consider that teachers have it quite good. They get paid well, they have plenty of holiday, and they have good benefits. They said, if you think it's this easy, come and give it a go yourself. Being a teacher is really, really hard work. And many of them spoke about that they're striking with a heavy heart. They don't want to leave children without an education today. They want to be in the classroom, but their concerns of the future of the industry. They're worried that they will not be able to retain staff, and in 5-10 years' time there will not be the staffing level to fund primary and secondary schools. Well, Gillian Keegan, the Education Secretary, says it's not realistic to look at inflation-busting pay rises for teachers. She says everybody is struggling right now. But Patrick, if those talks don't pick up momentum, if they don't come to a resolution, then we could see another 6 days of strike action by teachers. And we've seen the disruption to 7 million children in England and Wales today. Their parents and their families too have had to take days off work, potentially even unpaid days, in order to look after their children today.
Absolutely, Ellie. Look, thank you very much. Ellie Costello there just reporting to us about the teacher strike. Lots of significant questions which Ellie was raising there, actually, about teacher strikes, which we're going to get stuck into throughout the course of this show. Supposedly, anyway, teachers are amongst the 6th best paid out of teachers in the world, in this country, and the pension pot as well, some 23%. Not bad work if you can get it. Other people say, though, actually, it is a bit of a nightmare dealing with those sprogs every single day. Doogie Beattie's in Northern Ireland now, and he's with university staff in Belfast. Doogie, what's the situation where you are?
Well, they've all gone home, Patrick. It's time that the lecturers left. The strikes here, the pickets here earlier on, I spoke with them, and this morning they were in good voice. And their real problems here are to do with pensions, working conditions, and that includes casual workers, and of course that pay rise that they're looking for. And they do say that they want a near inflation busting pay rise. They're saying that they haven't been really looked at in 15 years, and that in that time they're then ending up working 5 days and really getting paid for 4. So they see that it is right for them to strike. And earlier on in the day, I spoke with Sean O'Connell, who is the president of the UCU in Queen's University. And he has basically said that there is enough money in Queen's University to pay for what they're looking for. He's also pointed there at 150 chancellors across the UK, and that there's so many millions between them. So the staff here are looking at another 18 days of disruption. These lecture theatres will be empty for those times, and you've got to feel sorry really for the students here, because of course they have come through 2 years of lockdown and COVID, then came into virtual learning, and now just when they're getting back on their feet again, the whole thing goes down for 18 days.
Exactly, Doogie. Thank you very much, Doogie Beattie there in Northern Ireland. Well, those two ones are education-based, and yet again it is. OK, it's parents. In the case of Doogie's one, it's students and children as well who suffer after, as we've rightly mentioned, an incredibly long and damaging lockdown period. I'm going to go now to Lisa Hartle, though. She's in London, and it's with train drivers. There you go, half a minute to keep up. There's so many strikes. Lisa, the train drivers, I guess they want an inflation-busting pay rise as well, do they?
Well, I haven't been with the train drivers, but I have been talking about them. So obviously businesses are impacted by so many things at the moment, with the cost of living crisis, rent prices going up, energy prices soaring, and people just not having as much money to spend. So when you add on top of that the strikes, it's just more pressure on businesses. So I've been talking to businesses, small businesses in central London, about how they're finding the strikes, and they said in particular it's the train strikes that are having the biggest impact, because staff can't come into work, footfall drops dramatically, and they're finding it really difficult to plan ahead because they don't know when the next industrial action is going to take place. I spoke to someone from the Federation of Small Businesses, and he said that it's actually even worse when there's different strikes across all sectors taking place on the same day. And of course, I asked the small business owners what they thought of the strikes, and some were sympathetic and did understand, whereas others were said that this is something that's affecting so many people at the moment that they just can't be sympathetic towards the strikes this time.
Yeah, no, indeed, that's it. And I can't help but wonder whether or not public sympathy will wane, especially with what is essentially a general strike, although, of course, they're not calling it that. Olivia, I'm going to go over to you now. Olivia Rutley is our political reporter and is, yes, I can see that, on Downing Street. And the civil servants, they've had a day off as well, haven't they?
They have, and about an hour ago we saw 3 different unions coming here to deliver a petition to Number 10, which is essentially calling on the government to drop its anti-strike legislation. All 3 of those union representatives called it spiteful legislation, which takes away all of their leverage, takes away their negotiating power. This is exactly what the government has been dreading, a day of coordinated strike action. We think that 500,000, up to 500,000 public sector workers walked out today. Now, you mentioned civil servants. There were 100,000 civil servants striking today across all different government departments, across 124 different government organisations. What they are demanding is a 10% pay rise. They've been offered a 2% pay rise, but the government is saying that that alone, when you think of all the other public sector strikes that are going on at the same time, acquiescing to the civil servants' demand would add up to £2.6 billion. Now, that is the entire cost of the levelling up fund that was announced last April. So this is exactly what the government's been dreading, because it makes it harder for them to give in to one union and not another. And we know that public sympathy is not the same across the board. Public sympathy for teachers is actually quite high. Public sympathy for train drivers is quite low. So what the government was hoping is that it could negotiate with one union more harshly than with another. But with this sort of coordinated strike action, that becomes more and more difficult when you've got them coming together and protesting together against the minimum level service legislation which the government is seeing through. It makes it more difficult to agree different deals across different sectors.
No, indeed. Olivia, I'm just going to stick with you for one quick one, if you'll let me, please. You are a political animal. You're always there in the cut and thrust of Westminster, etc. We played a clip a little bit earlier on from a civil servant who was saying that, as far as she was aware anyway, several civil servants now are saying they're going to have to go to food banks. They're one paycheck away from homelessness. Look, I've had a lot of emails in to saying that people don't quite buy it. I mean, are things really that bleak in the civil service, Olivia?
Well, I can't speak on behalf of the civil servant who claimed that her colleagues have gone to food banks. That may or may not be factually accurate. But what I can say is that they are not happy. We saw 85% of civil servants voting for this strike, and we're expecting to see far streamers who belong to a different union, the FDA union, expecting to go on strike next week. That said, this strike action wasn't agreed across all departments. HMRC, for example, are not walking out, and nor are, I'm pretty sure it's the Foreign Office. So it's not a universal opinion. That lady who you spoke to earlier, who believed that pretty much all civil servants are in huge financial difficulty, that's certainly not the case, because in some departments they're struggling to reach the 50% threshold for strike action. It differs across the board.
Indeed. Look, all of you, thank you very, very much. What a way to get the show going, with a roundup from a variety of different sectors there that are on strike. The last one that you heard there, Olivia Rutley, our political reporter. Thank you very, very much. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I am lobbing this over to you largely today. Why not let the viewers and the listeners do some of the heavy lifting? I want solutions. I'm a bit sick of problems. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Get your solutions coming in. So far, basically, some people are saying that Rishi Sunak and co should face down some of these unions. Yeah, all right, but if this goes on, how long are you prepared to let it go on for, when it is, of course, costing us hundreds of millions of pounds a day? An interesting little aside on this very quickly is I read this morning that if they gave in to all of the public sector pay demands, it would cost us somewhere in the region of £28 billion a year. And if you work that out, supposedly anyway, it's about £1,000 extra per household. So have you got an extra grand? Would you be willing to pay an extra grand for it, for that matter? Joining me now is someone who's lost out as a result of the teachers' strikes. It's Annette Kello. Now, Annette, there you are, Annette. Great to see you on the show. Now, Annette is a single parent and a freelance journalist as well, and only found out about the strikes, apparently, just a few days ago, and has struggled to find childcare. Well, Annette, firstly, I'm very sorry to hear that you've been disadvantaged as a result of these strikes. Do you want to just talk us through some of your experiences and then your opinion about it all, really?
Yes, sure. Obviously, I believe teachers are doing an amazing job and they need to be represented in the best way, particularly with their pay. Obviously, it throws a spanner in the works for single parents particularly myself, who has a child who has a disability. So it's very difficult getting childcare for him. And I also had a hospital appointment today, which I wasn't allowed to bring a child to, which is now being cancelled, which I'm sure with the NHS and everything going on will be a long time until I get back to that appointment. So I think it's a knock-on effect in all areas. And who knows if I would have even been able to get to the appointment with the bus strikes. So it's pretty bad for everybody.
Yes, quite, actually. And with some other strikes in the NHS, you might have managed to have got yourself childcare, found a bus that is actually running and then got there, and then still people might not have necessarily turned up, although they are not on strike today, as far as we're aware yet, though. Give it time. I mean, it's only 3:20. Can I just ask you, you've said that teachers do an amazing job. Teachers do an incredible job. Absolutely, undeniable. And we need teachers. Of course we do. And it needs to be an attractive career for people. It's a vital public service. But in light of what's happened with you today, and no doubt will have happened to others as well, struggling to get childcare, a missed appointment, I hope you're all right, by the way, a missed appointment, and then you look at the fact that teachers supposedly are, out of teachers in the world, the major economy is the 6th best in this country, and apparently, anyway, they get around a 23% pension. The average private sector is supposedly around 3.5%. Do you think it's justified them going on strike right now and wanting a pay rise above inflation?
I think that they've seen what is happening with the other strikes, and obviously they're very unhappy. If you look at it, there's 1,170 vacancies for primary teachers alone at the moment. Year on year, they've got a 6.8% pay going down. And with the cost of living crisis, particularly if you live in London, the rents are spiralling. People cannot afford. So why? And you have to look at it in the bigger spectrum. You could be a cleaner or work as a cashier in a fast food restaurant, and you would get the same amount as a teacher. So why would people be, pushing themselves to be educated, to go for the teaching route, when there's other jobs out there that pay the same? It's crazy.
Look, I'm putting you on the spot a little bit here, and sorry to do that, because I know this isn't your job, but the people whose job it is to try and sort this problem out are not doing it. We're talking about Walkout Wednesday, biggest day of strike action in a decade or so. What's the solution in that? Because the government is saying, well, they're not even saying they're sympathetic towards the pay demands. What they are saying is, we haven't got the cash. We can't give it to you. So what do we do, Annette?
Well, I'm not the finance officer, but I do think there's been wasted PPE being burnt. There's been many misdemeanours that we could go into that have happened with the government. I mean, if you go onto TikTok, you can go down a rabbit hole with that stuff. But there has to be a way that they look at it and find different things, different solutions. Because what's going to happen is teachers are not going to go into teaching. Nurses are going to give up. As I said, my son has a medical need. He's in hospital all the time, and I see what's happening there too. So why are people going to be drawn to these professions? And it's just going to have a knock-on effect for the whole country and education as a whole.
Indeed. Look, Annette, thank you very much. And I hope everything works out all right with your son, everything works out all right with you, and I hope we don't find ourselves in this situation again. But thank you very much for coming on the show and just giving... Frankly, we don't have enough real people in the news, do we? So good stuff. Annette Kello there, single parent, freelance journalist as well. Now, she only found out a few days ago about those teacher strikes. Look, we're going to get stuck into the nitty-gritty of all of this. I've got union reps coming your way, I've got MPs coming your way, and we can get into the finer points, I think, of all of this unrelenting strike action. But coming up, this is a topic that I know is going to get a lot of you going, and it's a failed Iranian asylum seeker who should have been removed from the UK years ago. He's been sent to a mental health hospital indefinitely after killing an elderly grandmother who had given him a home. I am asking you the question on top of the strike stuff. GBViews at gbnews.uk. Should we deport failed asylum seekers immediately? I'll be back in a moment.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back. Eamon Holmes, back on the TV with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes. Already to bless.
Yeah. Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
and right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Breaking news now, ladies and gentlemen, strap yourselves in, because a failed Iranian asylum seeker who should have been removed from the UK years ago will be sent to a mental health hospital indefinitely after killing an elderly woman who had given him a home. 34-year-old Shahin Darvish Narenjbon, who suffers from paranoid schizophrenia, has been sentenced at Leeds Crown Court this afternoon. With me for all of the details on what is a horrific case is our Home and Security Editor, Mark White. Mark, what is the latest?
It's an absolute shocker. Of course, the nature of the crime was horrific, but actually the real scandal here is that this individual had been a failed asylum seeker. He'd exhausted all avenues of appeal, I'm told, by 2017, yet for 5 years after, the Home Office did not remove this individual from the UK. He was still here and then able to kill this frail elderly pensioner, a woman by the name of Brenda Blaney, an absolute gem of a woman from all accounts, who befriended this man when he was working in a restaurant in Leeds a few years back. They had formed almost like a grandmother-grandson type of relationship, according to the court. She opened her home to him, gave him a bedroom, the use of her car, and also a study, because he was studying at university at the time as well. But as you say, diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, he had said that he had heard voices in his head which compelled him to kill this grandmother. She'd been on the phone, actually, on the 5th of January last year to her local store in the village of Thorniley Dale, which is in North Yorkshire, not far from Scarborough. She'd been ordering groceries when the line went dead. The shopkeeper there tried to call her back a dozen times, got no reply. The police were eventually called to that property and clearly found this woman lying in a pool of blood. She'd been strangled, head smashed against the kitchen floor. She'd been stabbed multiple times in the chest and her throat slashed. It's absolutely awful. But the fact is that this individual, he'd come to the UK in 2005 as a 15-year-old to study, we're told, but his permission to remain in the UK had lapsed by 2015. So he did what so many people who are caught living here illegally do, which is to try to claim asylum. That asylum process, I'm told, was turned down. It went to appeal multiple times, but that was then exhausted by 2017. And this is what we need to know the answer to. If that was the case, why on earth didn't officials get him on a flight out of the UK in the 5 years between that lapsed process and the time that he killed? He should not have been in the country and able to kill this woman.
Exactly that. And this is one of the reasons why I'm opening it up to our audience today on this particular issue. When it comes to cases such as this, where individuals have been repeatedly denied the right to live in this country, and we know that and we know potentially they've got issues as well, why on earth are they not being deported immediately? But sadly, Mark, this does appear to be becoming an all too familiar situation.
Yeah, I mean, there are, we know, hundreds, thousands of people who are foreign nationals, be they living here legally or illegally, who have gone on to commit offences. But some very notable individuals there as well, especially people that have been in the asylum system. You remember just last week, a young Afghan, we say young, he was 14 when he came to this country, Abdul Rahimzai, Lawangin Abdul Rahimzai, was an adult when he came here, but said he was 14, was allowed into the country. Utterly astonishingly, he'd actually been convicted in his absence of killing two people, murdering two people in Serbia, gunning them down with an AK-47 before then moving on to Norway and Italy, where he was convicted of drugs offences, turned down for asylum in Norway, but still managed to get into this country and into the asylum system before in Bournemouth, then murdering an aspiring Royal Marine.
Yeah, look, indeed. And I know you've got numerous other cases for us as well there, Mark, and we're going to talk through them in the next hour. But that was that breaking news, and he's been sentenced indefinitely to a psychiatric hospital, basically.
Yeah, and so we don't know if he'll ever be removed from the country. It depends how long he's in the psychiatric unit and whether they can get him off to Iran, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we'll keep you updated on all of this, ladies and gents. We'll go into more detail on some of those other cases as well with Mark very, very shortly. Look, you're with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. Shop prices are at record highs after inflation accelerated in January, with a warning that the peak is yet to arrive. And could a bird last seen in the 17th century be brought back to life thanks to the magic of science? Find out more in just a few moments. Keep your views coming in. GB Views at gbnews.uk. Here's your headlines.
Thanks, Patrick. 34 minutes past 3. Here's the latest. Hundreds of thousands of workers are taking part in Walkout Wednesday, the biggest day of industrial action for more than a decade. Up to 500,000 workers across 7 trade unions are striking over pay, jobs and conditions. Teachers are part of the action, along with Border Force officers, bus and train drivers, causing widespread travel disruption. The Prime Minister has denied being too weak to root out sleaze from the government. Sir Keir Starmer made the claim during PMQs, citing a string of recent allegations. He said Rishi Sunak must have known about HMRC's investigation into Nadeem Zahawi at the time that he was appointed party chair. He also accused Mr Sunak of forcing people to work for a bully.
Deputy Prime Minister was facing 24 separate allegations of bullying. According to recent reports, some of the complainants were physically sick. One says they were left suicidal. How would he feel if one of his friends or relatives was being forced to work for a bully simply because the man at the top was too weak to do anything about it?
Well, the Prime Minister responded by saying that Sir Keir Starmer had supported the spread of hate whilst Jeremy Corbyn was Labour leader.
When I was made aware of formal complaints, I instructed a leading independent KC to conduct an investigation because I take action when these things happen. But what did he say at the weekend? He said at the weekend that hate had been allowed to spread unchallenged in the Labour Party under his predecessor. He was speaking as if he wasn't even there. But he was sitting right next to him, supporting him for 4 long years.
The FBI is searching President Joe Biden's beach house in Delaware as part of an ongoing investigation into his handling of classified documents. His lawyer says the operation was carried out with the consent of Biden's legal team. The FBI searched one of Biden's homes in Delaware last month after his team found classified documents there. His former private office was also searched in November. On TV, online and on DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Patrick will be back in just a moment.
He's the king of breakfast TV and he's back. Eamon Holmes, back on the TV
Surprised
with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes. Already to bless.
Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
Every weekend, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Bigger and better, starting at 8 p.m. Friday and Saturday.
Can't be too safe. Bring it on. Has there ever been a more innuendo feature?
And Sundays, we're on at 9.
It's ridiculous. Just get on with it. Maybe you should get a proper job.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Now, police searching for missing woman Nicola Bulley have found a potential key witness after appealing to the public yesterday. The mother of 2 disappeared last Friday morning whilst walking her Springer Spaniel by the River Wyre in Lancashire. Let's go live now to Lancashire, where GB News' reporter Will Hollis is there for us. Will, what's the very latest?
Yes, well, the last update that we had from Lancashire Police was that they found that key witness, a man who was described as being tall with a white fluffy dog and walking in the area at around the time when Nicola was last seen. We haven't had any sort of update on top of that, so we don't know the content of those conversations, but police say that he was speaking to the police. What we do know, though, today, Patrick, is that the same things have been happening today that have been happening ever since Nicola went missing on Friday. We've seen boats going up and down the River Wyre. We've seen different types of dogs. One that was described to me as a cadaver dog in a boat going along the River Wyre, and it was clearly smelling for something, whatever it does. It was clearly doing a job there on the River Wyre in the search for Nicola. It's not just the police and their partner organisations. Here where I am at the tennis club is where local people have been coming together and they've been walking on different routes around the River Wyre, and that's because, as I heard from some of Nicola's closest friends, that they can't give up hope, and because there are, of course, 2 little girls at home that want their mummy home.
Nikki is just a lovely human being inside and out.
living a normal life, dropping the children off at school, going on a daily walk, things planned, going out the weekend, seeing friends and family. Yeah, you just can't make sense that this is actually happening and here we are.
And I suppose knowing Nikki and what type of person she is, a mum and a partner, this is out of character?
Yeah, definitely, yeah. Nikki, as you said, we're a rural village, we're just normal people, simple lives. Yeah, it's completely out of character, yeah.
And then just on the point about the family, how is the family coping at this point? You're quite close to the family.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got children at the same school, and that's how our relationship began. You imagine yourselves, Paul's got an immense job of looking after his family, supporting the girls. Yeah, imagine the roller coaster he's going on, living this, as he says, perpetual nightmare. So you can put yourselves in those shoes and think the roller coaster they are going on. And we've got to be here again as a community to support that, and that's why we are out here in conditions like this, just trying to find any clues we can.
We are just trying to hold on to the hope. That's what's keeping us going. Knowing that her two little girls are at home missing mummy, and knowing that mummy is missing is what's driving us forward. We know that knowing Nikki, her family are everything, and we know without a doubt that if she could be at home with them, that's where she'd be.
Just as a very quick recap, Nicola went missing last Friday. Her mobile phone was found on a bench. Her spaniel dog was found nearby, but Nicola is still missing nearly a week on, and police say they are still extremely concerned as to where Nicola might have gone. And the message is very much that if you were passing the area of St. Michael's at around 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock last Friday, if you do have any sort of camera on your car, or if you're at home nearby that might have any sort of CCTV, they really do want to hear from you.
Indeed. Will, thank you very much. Will Hollis there, reporting from Lancashire after that tragic case there of the missing individual. Obviously, everybody hopes that she's found safe and well and that the police do manage to locate Nicola very, very soon. Look, lots of you have been getting in touch. I'm going to go into the inbox shortly, gbviews at gbnews.uk. A story that's really got you going. Yes, OK, there's the strike action, but there is also, of course, that case of a failed asylum seeker who, frankly, should have been deported from this country years ago, failed all exhausted avenues when it came to applying for asylum in this country back in 2017, went on to sadly kill an elderly lady in her own home. We'll be taking your views on that. I've been asking whether or not failed asylum seekers should be deported immediately. Get your views coming in to me. But just moving on from that, the price of food has risen by the sharpest margin since figures began, as the price of essentials is up apparently 16.7% year on year. The new figures from the British Retail Consortium show an 8% increase in prices since last January, and with inflation currently standing at 10.5%, their warning price rises shows no sign of slowing down. With me now is Matthew Lash, man for a crisis, the head of public policy at the Institute for Economic Affairs. Matthew, thank you very much. 16.7%, an absolute whopper. What's going on?
Look, it is shocking for a lot of households and an extremely difficult time for many people. There's a whole bunch of things going on within the food industry. There's supply chain challenges associated with the Russia-Ukraine war, issues with rising costs of fertilizers and pesticides, a lot of which comes from that part of the world. You've got rising costs of energy, increased transport costs, and labor shortages. So there's a whole lot of specific industry-related problems that are coming out and pushing up prices for producers of food. What really here, though, is in many ways this is a bit of a hangover of the very loose economic situation we saw during COVID, which is we decided to basically pump a whole lot of money into the economy. Inevitably, that's going to feed through into higher prices for consumers. And the result of that is inflation across the board, not just in energy or whatever else, but it's certainly in food as a key resource.
Yeah, but Matthew, I'm worried that we're going to end up trapped, or we are trapped, in some kind of never-ending perpetual death spiral when it comes to our economy, because we're hearing all of this stuff now about food prices, the price of essentials going up, and then I've got 500,000 public sector workers on strike today. They say it's about working conditions, and a lot of the teachers are banging on about, oh, it's really for the kids. Well, that's interesting, because from where I'm sitting, it does appear to mostly be about the money in your pocket. And in order to pay for these things, we're going to have to increase people's taxes. But then the IMF comes out and goes, what you need to do is go for growth. We had a Prime Minister who wanted to go for growth, and a lettuce outlasted her. Are we doing this to ourselves, Matthew?
Look, in some respects, this is outside of the control of the government. You know, they didn't necessarily set the very loose monetary conditions or cause the war with Ukraine that's pushed up global energy prices. But we've got to think about, I think you're right, think about where we started here, which is the UK economy has been underperforming on growth for well over a decade. We've seen a lot of murmurs and discussion about the need to promote economic growth from the government. We haven't necessarily seen the policies that could match that aspiration. And if we have a kind of a low growth, low productivity economy, ultimately lower wages are going to be the result. Food is going to be less affordable for people, and our standard of living is going to be lower. And I think you're right there. We need that growth strategy. We need a kind of meaningful policies to reform. If you look at something like food, there are things the government could do to lower the price of food. We know getting rid of some of the tariffs on imported food and the subsidies that were there as part of the EU's common agricultural policy. That's thought to push up food prices by about 17%, being a member of the EU's systems. We haven't really diverged from that. We haven't said outside the EU we're going to get rid of all that burden.
But this is it, Matthew. Sorry to interrupt, but that's a really pertinent point. And in light of the, frankly, never-ending cycle of Brexit stories that we did yesterday, in light of that, this is an avenue that our government could be pursuing. The British people voted for independence, and now British people are poor as a result of the economic situation. And a British government should be doing everything it can to make sure that people can afford to eat. And we've got an option there, and we're not doing it because we're too afraid of annoying some unelected boffin in Brussels. Is that right?
Well, kind of. I mean, in a sense, a lot of people have pointed, probably rightly so, that as a result of Brexit, there's increased bureaucracy in trade and imports from the EU. And that has pushed up food prices and probably made some level of contribution to inflation. Maybe some people exaggerate it, but it's probably made some level of contribution. The whole point of Brexit was we've got this opportunity now to lower food tariffs to the rest of the world, to have more imports from other places at lower costs without having to protect European farming interests that were the reason for the common agricultural policy. So we haven't taken up the opportunities provided by Brexit, but we have got a lot of the costs. Of course, there will be certain internal domestic lobbyists from the Farmers Union who will say you can't possibly get rid of these tariffs and lower foreign food prices. Well, I'm sorry, we're in a cost of living crisis. We have to get rid of the costs on consumers.
Let's get nimble, absolutely. Thank you very much. Matthew Lesh, Head of Public Policy at the Institute for Economic Affairs. There, just summing up, and it's starting to make me increasingly angry, actually, ladies and gentlemen. I've nearly got the vein going in the side of my temple here, as to an option where people like you and I and everyone we know could pay less in supermarkets for food, and because we don't want to upset people, a club that we voted to leave, we're not doing it. And I'm finding that increasingly hard to actually square with reality. But back now to that news that we brought you within the last half hour, that a failed Iranian asylum seeker who should have been removed from the UK years ago will be sent to a mental health hospital indefinitely after killing an elderly woman who'd given him a home. 34-year-old Shahin Darvish Narenjbon, who suffered from paranoid schizophrenia, has been sentenced at Leeds Crown Court this afternoon. And I was asking lots of you, really, whether or not you felt as though failed asylum seekers should be deported immediately. Yes, there are legal loopholes there and legal minefields, and it would require a change in the law, and I understand that. But if you look at the specifics of this case, this particular chap exhausted all his avenues to remain in the United Kingdom in 2017. We are years on from that now, and it was years indeed before he went on to commit this crime. And I just can't help but wonder whether or not public safety is being put at risk by the very, very, very slow-moving or, frankly, nearly non-existent deportation process that this country has. John says enough is enough. How many more cases are going to come to light before action is taken? And, John, just on that one, before I read the rest of your email out, Mark White, our Home and Security Editor, is going to be back in the next hour, and he has actually compiled a list of cases, just some of them, where stuff like this has taken place. He goes on. Any failed asylum seekers, it should say, should be deported with immediate effect. No ifs and no buts. Sean says this lady, it's the victim now, was left with a failed asylum seeker on her own, left by the government's failed asylum system instead of deporting him. Lay your reeds for this poor woman on the doorstep of Downing Street. And it's one of several emails, I must say, with increasing regularity that I am getting of people looking for someone to blame. Understandably, it's horrific stuff, this, and people do, frankly, want someone to be held to account for it. And they're saying, well, can we start suing the Home Office? Can we start suing these people? Of course, the Home Office would say they're doing all that they can, possibly, and they admit that the system is broken. They just can't really agree on the way to actually fix it. Margaret says, such a sad story. Our thoughts are with the lady's family, as he is a failed asylum seeker. Could we charge the Iranian government for his upkeep? Well, I mean, well, no, obviously not, but I do get the point that you're getting at. Jane says, how heartbreaking to hear. Us Brits are the most caring and welcoming on this planet, by far. Even after everything that she had done for that man, he killed her, he needs to be sent back to Iran straight away. I mean, the other argument with that is, and I suppose we can't really send him to Iran, although the question is then, if he wasn't really a genuine asylum seeker, then I suppose we could have sent him to Iran. Look, very strong views on all of this. So we'll be talking about it yet again with Mark White in the next hour. If you are just joining us, it is this really shocking case of an individual who was trying to claim asylum in this country. He failed and then was living here for 7 years, having failed, and then sadly went on to take the life of an elderly lady. And my concern, of course, would be how many times is this going to happen, or something like this going to happen, before we get a grip? And at what point do the public have to say, hang on a minute, this is happening far too often now, and our public safety should come first? GB views at gbnews.uk. I want a variety of views on that if we can get them. But moving on, something completely different. Could we be on the verge of seeing a return of an famous, I think is a better way of putting it, bird? Very few birds are infamous, aren't they, really? A bird not seen since the 17th century. Scientists in the US think so, as they've pledged to de-extinct the dodo through gene editing technology and pigeon samples. Now, look, initially, I thought this was an absolutely tremendous idea because I thought it would pave the way to me having a saber-toothed tiger as a pet, or maybe like a pygmy T-Rex or something. And I was quickly told, no, that's nuts. But with me now is Peter Stevenson, OBE, no less, OBE, good stuff, the Chief Policy Advisor at Compassion in World Farming. Now, Peter, why shouldn't we resurrect the dodo?
There's no reason why we shouldn't, but it's a bit ridiculous. It's a distraction from the real challenge, which is that we need to act quickly to stop even more extinctions of the animals we currently do have. You know, a huge number of animals are faced either with big reductions in their numbers or even extinction. For example, the Asian elephant. And I think that's where we should be targeting our energies and resources, not trying to bring back to life the dodo.
Being a little bit facetious here, but do we need to clamp down on humanity? Because it sounds to me a little bit like we can just resurrect anything that does go extinct.
Well, I suspect that it's actually going to be much harder to do than the scientists are necessarily letting us know. But, you know, the problems we're getting at the moment with wildlife, partly they're coming from the wildlife trait, people wanting certain animals as pets. But, you know, above all, they're coming from modern farming. We're having, you know, huge swathes of forest in South America are being felled, not just forests, but other really important wild habitats for animals, simply to create more pasture for beef cattle. They're also we're seeing forests and other really important areas being felled to grow soy. But 3/4 of the world's soy is being used to feed factory-farmed pigs and poultry here in Europe and in the US. So we need to rein back on our huge expansion of farm animals and the growing of the crops to feed those animals. And that could actually throw a lifeline to many of our current wildlife that are in danger of extinction.
Are you a vegan, Peter?
No, I'm a vegetarian, but recognise that I probably ought to be a vegan, trying to move in that direction. But the message I'm giving is not a vegetarian or vegan one. Really? It's one of saying we as a population, particularly in the wealthy parts of the world, need to eat less meat. Doesn't mean we have to be vegetarian or vegan. But the sheer quantities we're now eating are actually pushing an awful lot of animals, including lots of farmland birds, into extinction.
Well, we might be able to solve that with the dodo. Returning to topic, would it be such a bad thing if we just had just the odd dodo, knocking around the place? No?
I've nothing...
You've got nothing against the dodo, is what you're telling me. It's nothing personal with the dodo.
Let's have the odd dodo, but we need to be careful about gene editing. This process that's going to bring the dodo back to life threatens an awful lot of harm to farmed animals.
Right.
It's going to be used to push pigs, chickens, dairy cows to faster growth and higher yields. And the history of the last 50
All right.
years of the farm animal breeding industry is that in trying to achieve high yields, it's caused an immense amount of suffering and health problems.
All right, absolutely. Sorry to snuff you out like the dodo, but I'm going to have to go, I'm afraid, Peter. That's our time. Peter Stevenson there, OBE, Chief Policy Advisor at Compassion in World Farming. A lot of you already getting in touch to say, Patrick, we've seen Jurassic Park. We know how this ends. Have a day off. You're with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. Coming up, loads more on your strikes, loads more on that failed asylum seeker case as well. And, well, just stay watching, you find out.
Hello, welcome to the latest weather update with me, Annie Shuttleworth from the Met Office. Rain will continue to affect northern areas over the next few days, but we'll see further dry weather across the south. Now, high pressure is dominating across the south. That's bringing that drier, settled weather. But we've got weather fronts over the next few days into Thursday and Friday, continuing to push into the north, bringing some rain. And on Wednesday night, you can see across much of Scotland and into parts of northern England, we'll see persistent rain for a time, especially across the Highlands and Western Isles, though the winds will ease a little bit. Further south, it'll be quite dry overnight, but turning much cloudier. And with plenty of cloud around, it'll be another mild night for the time of year, frost-free by the time we get to Thursday morning. Now, remaining quite cloudy throughout Thursday across the whole of the UK, rain will become a little bit more restricted to the Highlands and western areas and northern areas of Scotland. However, there could be the odd drizzly shower affecting parts of West Wales and into the southwest too. It's going to be a milder day than Wednesday on Thursday, temperatures reaching 12 or 13 degrees, though it will be quite breezy out there. Then into Thursday evening and Friday morning, another cloudy and breezy night. This band of rain that starts off in northern Scotland will sink southwards into parts of Northern Ireland and northern England, as well as parts of North Wales too. Elsewhere, it'll be dry and cloudy and again frost-free, temperatures well above average for the time of year by the time we get to the early hours of Friday. Another cloudy start on Friday, fairly breezy, especially across coastal areas, and into the northwest you can see the next band of rain arriving. So some further rain for Friday and Saturday, but by Sunday turning a little bit cooler and a little bit brighter.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio,
with the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back, everybody. It's just gone 4 o'clock. You're with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. A jam-packed hour coming your way. We'll cross live to the picket lines on Walkout Wednesday, with the biggest strike in a decade currently taking place. Members of 7 trade unions are taking industrial action. It affects schools, universities, trains and buses, amongst other things. That's up to 500,000 workers having a day off. Some workers claim they're one paycheck away from homelessness. I will be speaking directly to one of those striking workers and a Conservative MP as the party looks to rush through its controversial anti-strike laws. I also want to hear from you this hour as I ask, is our asylum policy a threat to national security? Today, a failed Iranian asylum seeker who should have been removed from the UK years ago has been sent to a mental health hospital indefinitely after killing an elderly grandmother who had given him a home. Our Home and Security editor, Mark White, will have the very latest on all of that. And we're going to go live, believe it or not, to Washington, D.C. to hear from the former Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, as he addresses support for Ukraine. Little rumours as well, he might say a couple of other bits and bobs, so we'll take that live. Boris Johnson live this hour. GBviews at gbnews.uk. Loads coming your way. Make sure you get in touch, especially on a solution to the strike action and whether or not you think failed asylum seekers should be deported immediately. GBviews at gbnews.uk. Now, though, here's your headlines.
Patrick, thank you, and good afternoon to you. The top story on GB News, well, as you've been hearing, hundreds of thousands of workers across the UK have been taking part in what they're calling Walkout Wednesday today. It's the biggest day of industrial action in more than a decade. Up to 500,000 workers across 7 trade unions are striking over pay, jobs and conditions. Teachers are part of the action, along with Border Force officers, bus and train drivers, all causing widespread travel disruption.
They didn't break down, but they basically said very clearly, look, we can't do anything to stop this strike. This is going ahead on the 1st of February, but we do have 28 days between this and the next strike, so we will continue those discussions. But what we can't do is offer inflation busting, pay rises, because we're really focused on getting inflation down and halving the inflation for everybody, so we all feel better and have more money in our pockets.
Gillian Keegan, the Education Secretary, speaking there. Well, Kevin Courtney is the General Secretary of the National Education Union, and he says the government needs to find the money.
I never thought we'd reach these thresholds. They weren't planning on us reaching them, and since we've reached the thresholds, 40,000 more people have joined the union as well. So it does show there's a huge strength of feeling in the profession that government must act and put things right. I think Gillian Keegan is hoping that the strike won't be effective and there won't be any further action. There could be further action. She needs to do a deal so that that doesn't happen.
Well, amidst the ongoing strike action, the Trades Union Congress has handed a petition to Downing Street opposing the government's plans for a new law on minimum levels of service during times of strikes. The petition against the so-called strikes bill was signed by more than 200,000 members of the public. TUC General Secretary Paul Novak says he hopes the ongoing strikes will send a strong message to the government about the anger the public is feeling.
They're trying to push through what is a particularly spiteful piece of legislation. Now, we've had hundreds of thousands of public sector workers take strike action, quite often for the first time ever. And instead of listening to the concerns of those workers or responding to the concerns, the government has just tried to introduce legislation to make it more difficult for them to take that strike action. So I think the government should be more responsible, should talk to their workforce, should talk to unions and come to the table on public sector pay.
Meanwhile, at PMQs today, the Prime Minister has been busy denying being too weak to root out sleaze. Sir Keir Starmer made the claim, citing a string of recent allegations. He said Rishi Sunak must have known, for example, about the HMRC's investigation into Nadeem Zahawi at the time he was appointed party chair. He also accused Mr Sunak of forcing people to work for a bully.
The Deputy Prime Minister was facing 24 separate allegations of bullying. According to recent reports, some of the complainants were physically sick. One says they were left suicidal. How would he feel if one of his friends or relatives was being forced to work for a bully simply because the man at the top was too weak to do anything about it?
Well, the Prime Minister responded to that by saying Sir Keir had supported the spread of hate, as he called it, whilst Jeremy Corbyn was Labour leader.
When I was made aware of formal complaints, I instructed a leading independent KC to conduct an investigation because I take action when these things happen. But what did he say at the weekend? He said at the weekend that hate had been allowed to spread unchallenged in the Labour Party under his predecessor. He was speaking as if he wasn't even there. But he was sitting right next to him, supporting him for 4 long years.
Now, news away from home, the FBI is searching President Joe Biden's beach house in Delaware as part of an ongoing investigation into his handling of classified documents. His lawyer saying the operation is being carried out with the consent of Biden's legal team. The FBI searched one of Biden's homes in Delaware last month after his team found classified documents there. His former private office was also searched in November. Here, a further 1,500 patients of a convicted criminal who was also a breast surgeon are being recalled so their treatment can be re-investigated. Ian Patterson was handed a 20-year prison sentence in 2017 after he was convicted on 17 counts of wounding people with intent. Over 14 years, he subjected more than 1,000 patients to unnecessary and damaging operations whilst he was operating in the West Midlands. The new patients were discovered after a trawl through old IT systems. That's it. You're up to date on GB News for now. More news as it happens. Let's get back to Patrick.
All right, people, let's rattle through this, shall we? Nearly 9 out of 10 schools and sixth form colleges in England and Wales were either fully or partially shut today as teachers represented by the National Education Union walked out. A poll by the Association of School and College Leaders has suggested the majority of schools have been affected by today's teachers' walkout. Labour MP and former Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell has been joining workers, obviously, on the picket line today. He said a corporate tax rate rise could fund better wages for public sector workers.
The issue at the moment is that we've got a government that seems to be redistributing wealth or redistributing it upwards. So just as one example, if capital gains tax was at the same level as income tax, we'd be able to afford a decent pay rise for everybody. It's measures like that where if you introduce fairness in our taxation system, we can actually have a fair system where we can afford our public services.
Yeah, of course, until everyone with money leaves, and then who are you going to tax? But there we go. That was the Labour MP and former Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell there. Let's cross live now to our national reporter, Ellie Costello. She's been at a teachers' rally in London. And, Ellie, yes, what was it like there, then? A lot of strong feeling, no doubt.
There certainly was, Patrick. It really was a carnival atmosphere here down in Whitehall in London a little bit earlier on. The National Education Union were expecting about 10,000 teachers to turn out here to try and have their voices heard just outside Downing Street, which is actually just behind me there. But they say that 40,000 teachers, in fact, did turn out this afternoon. They came with their dogs, they came with their musical instruments, their placards, a really jovial atmosphere going on between teachers and support staff. I spoke to some of them on the march today and I asked them why they were there.
I've only been a teacher for about 10 years. I'm now only just earning as much as I did in the private sector doing something utterly unimportant 25 years ago. It's a lie to say that head teachers and schools are kind of left in chaos and confused because they understand why we're doing this.
Without industrial action, nothing has changed in the last 10 years. We're down on recruitment, we're down on TAs. Everything in the last 10 years has rapidly descended in standards. Without a change, things aren't going to improve.
This is for the kids.
And
this is for the kids.
We've had 2 bank holidays scheduled for a coronation and like a jubilee, whatever it is. If they can put in bank holidays at the drop of the hat with no comment at all about the welfare of children, then why is this any different? Because this is for the welfare of children.
Anyone who says that we don't care about kids because we're not in school literally needs to re-educate themselves on the purpose of strikes and what teachers are asking for.
Well, the NEU now say that they think 200,000 teachers walked out today. They say 85% of schools in England and Wales were closed today, or at least partially closed. That impacted on 7 million children in England and Wales, and of course their parents and their families too, some of whom have had to give up a day of work, perhaps even a day's pay, in order to look after their children today. Kevin Courtney of the NEU says it's the largest teacher strike since the 80s. They're still calling on a better offer than the 5% that they got last year. They say that that had already come out of school budgets, meaning that it meant the children had less. And some teachers that I was speaking to today said their classrooms are cold. They need better pay to fund their schools. Now, Gillian Keegan, the Education Secretary, says it's not realistic to look at inflation busting pay rises. She says they're actually trying to get inflation down, so now is not the time to be giving out 11% pay rises. But Patrick, the way things stand, if a deal is not done between the government and the National Education Union, then we could be looking at another 6 more days of teacher strike action. If it's anything like we've seen today, it's going to be very destructive indeed.
Yeah, Ellie, thank you very much. Ellie Costello there, reporting from just outside Downing Street. There was a march taking place earlier today from essentially angry teachers who are going on strike. It's got a lot of you quite exercised, this. I think everyone can agree that teachers do, broadly speaking anyway, a good job, a valuable job. Obviously, we need teachers. And if there is a recruitment crisis and a retention crisis, that's a massive problem for Britain. But at the same time, I am having a little look now, and I wanted to double-check my facts. That's always important, isn't it? Especially if you happen to be presenting a news show about the pension contributions. And the pension contribution for a teacher is 23.6%. The average pension contribution in the private sector is around 3.5%. So I can't help but wonder whether or not some teachers will be willing to be paid more up front as a way of maybe getting some kind of pay rise then. I don't know. What do you think? Joining me now is Conservative MP Jonathan Gullis, who used to be a teacher and is also a former schools minister. Jonathan, thank you very much. Just on that now, there aren't too many jobs where you get 12 weeks holiday, a pension contribution of 23.6%, and from what I can tell as well, an average salary of around 42 grand.
You're perfectly bang on the money. This is a well-paid profession that comes with all those benefits, the pension, the saving on childcare costs in the holiday period when you can work from home if you need to do work at all. I think this is a really great profession to work in. It's just a shame that the Not Education Union decided to bring the education sector into disrepute, undermine the great work of many teachers. And actually, teachers are selfless. It's union baron bosses that are selfish, and we're seeing that on a grand scale today.
What's the government's plan, though, to stop all of this stuff? Is it to wait it out? Because I'm looking at the numbers who actually voted to strike on the NEU, and it was only 48%.
Well, like you say, if you actually add the NASUWT, who didn't meet the threshold, the NAHT, who didn't meet the threshold, and the NEU, the majority of teachers voted to not strike or didn't return their ballot, which obviously is in itself a choice as well. So actually what the Not Education Union doing with Bolshevik, Balston and Commie Courtney is trying to live out their socialist utopian fantasy at the expense of children, which can lead me only to believe that they must hate children, must hate their life opportunities being, because ultimately if they did care about children, they'd want them to be in the classroom, learning from their teacher, the expert, not putting parents on low incomes, losing a day's pay if they work at the checkout, or the sparky, or the plumber, or the brickie who needs to go to work today but can't because they have to stay home and perform childcare. And I don't really like the idea that there was a jovial atmosphere on Whitehall. There's nothing jovial about kids missing out on their education. That's ruining their life chances, particularly in areas like Stoke-on-Trent North, Kidsgrove and Talk.
You know, you used to be a teacher, also a former schools minister, so you know exactly what it's like at the coalface of teaching, as it were. What we're hearing from a lot of the people who are on these marches is this is about the kids. From what you seem to be saying there, you are suggesting that it's not really about the kids.
Well, let's have a look at the reality when with those people who are trying to push that. At no stage have I heard anyone come up with any ideas that we're not already doing to try and improve recruitment and retention. There's a 28,000 bursary just for a one-off payment if you take up, let's say, teaching in a science or maths subject. There is levelling up payments, so if you're in an education investment area, you can get up to extra £3,000 in certain subjects and in certain locations, like Stoke-on-Trent, for being a teacher. You have teaching and learning responsibilities. I started my teaching career on £25,000 a year. 7.5 years later, I finished it on £50,000 a year because I took on additional middle leader responsibilities, not senior leadership. When the average secondary school head teacher earns around £94,000 a year, it's hard to feel empathetic when actually schools have had a £7.7 billion increase in funding from the Spending Review 2021, and then a further £4.4 billion increase from the autumn statement last year with the Chancellor and the Prime Minister, which means education budgets are £20 billion a year better off than what they were in 2010. So this is a government that's been investing in the education sector, driving up standards, holding, giving teachers the powers through academisation and head teachers the power to deliver the education that they deserve, that those children deserve. And so this idea that we not put pupils first is for the birds, to be quite frank.
They will say, and indeed they do say, Jonathan, that the situation has changed because of the cost of living crisis. How do you respond to that?
Well, I would say I was the minister who signed off on the 5% pay increase for 2022-23, and that's because we accepted in full the independent pay body review's recommendations, and a new teacher got an 8.9% increase. For September, a new teacher will start on £30,000 a year, delivering on the Conservative Party manifesto agreement made in the 2019 general election. And obviously, the unions should be engaging and putting forward their case for what needs to happen with pay. But the number one issue that comes up in surveys from unions and from the Department for Education is workload. And actually, what would be better is to sit around the table, look at best examples of workload, and get schools to actually make it so that teachers are spending more time in the classroom teaching and less time doing bureaucratic nonsense in the background.
I can't help but wonder whether or not there's a slight elephant in the room here, Jonathan, which is that a lot of teachers, in many people's eyes anyway, or the unions, I should say, are infiltrated by a certain ideology. I dare say as well that there's a lot of, flag waving and saying, OK, well, look, mass immigration, for example, is a very, very, very good thing. The reality is there are a lot of inner-city schools at the minute, which must be an incredibly difficult place to work, and some would argue as well quite lawless. In fact, there are quite a few schools who have an in-school police officer. Do you think that actually the reality is that it's just not become a particularly nice place to work in a lot of these schools?
I think teaching is incredibly hard, but also incredibly rewarding profession as well. And actually, at the end of the day, when you get the chance to give back the world-class education I was lucky to receive and give pupils who wouldn't have had those opportunities otherwise to ensure that they get the very best that they deserve, change their life chances, change their outcomes, change their aspirations, I think that's a really positive thing. But you are correct with behaviour, but that comes from strong leadership in schools. And I look at Catherine Burblesing, a fantastic leader at Michaela Community School over in Brent, who has a zero-tolerance, no-nonsense approach. And that's the type of thing that should be rolled out across our country. And thanks to Tom Bennett and the behaviour hubs that this government's created, that is going slowly but surely across our country. And we just need to make sure that head teachers have their teachers' backs rather than caving in to unruly adolescents or, in some cases, parent power.
OK, just very quickly, because I want to be very clear on this then. Your position as former schools minister and indeed a former teacher yourself, serving Conservative MP, your position is that there needs to be more discipline in schools and that teachers, frankly, get a pretty good deal. In fact, they're well paid for the job that they do and shouldn't be striking.
Teachers should not be striking. Teachers should be in the classroom giving their pupils the learning that they deserve, particularly making up after that COVID years that disrupted so much. And let's get around the table and talk about the things that teachers really moan about, which is workload. And understandably, that needs to improve. OK, Jonathan, thank you very, very much. Jonathan Golisek, Conservative MP. Right, I'm going to talk now to someone who has lost out as a result of the teacher strikes. It's Catherine Warrilow, who is a mum of two. She's also managing director of the events website daysout.com. There you go. That's ironic, because you've probably been stuck today, have you, with your kids? I don't know. What's happened with you today, then? What's your situation? Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, so I have managed to make it to work, but spent kind of a stressful day yesterday and the day before trying to figure out childcare. My husband's a key worker, so he can't take days off work at short notice. We're lucky we have a close-knit community of other school parents, grandparents down the road. So we've had kind of a juggle of childcare today between school parents, grandparents helping out so that my husband and I could carry on and do our jobs as normal.
Okay. Can I ask, what's your sympathy level like for striking teachers?
I'm hugely sympathetic, and I think Jonathan made some interesting points. From my perspective, I think this isn't just about pay. you can choose to decide whether you think teachers are well paid or not for what they do. For me, what I see in schools, having a child at primary school and a child at secondary school, is that teachers aren't just educators anymore. They're safeguarding officers, they're mental health workers, they're getting involved in things like food poverty, mental health, eating disorders, bullying, sexual abuse, domestic abuse. And having had the Chancellor's statement literally just a couple of days ago about kind of everything starting with education and bringing out this great British genius, how on earth are we supposed to do that as a nation if we can't give our teachers and our schools the tools, resource, budget and salaries they need to do that? So
can I ask on that one then, Catherine? And it's potentially a slightly, what should I say, unfashionable question maybe to ask, but I'm not shy of those, to be fair. You've made a very, very good point there about the fact that teachers now and schools, their breakfast clubs, they sometimes can be mum and dad, social workers, carers, whatever. All of this stuff that is way above what, you know, your average geography teacher or your maths teacher is supposed to really be doing. Does some of this fall down on the job of parents? Does parents, in some cases, need to up their game? Not you, of course. I'm sure you're a wonderful parent.
I try my best. Yes, I mean, my personal view is that the parents are the primary educator and obviously the primary child carer and educator when it comes to life skills outside of the classroom, and have 100% responsibility for the well-being and upbringing of their children. However, if a child is struggling, whether that's mentally, behaviourally, socially, medically or otherwise, those challenges are going to follow them into the classroom. The benefit we have is that we have, as a society and in education, we have much greater understanding of things like dyslexia, autism spectrum traits, eating disorders, mental health, social media, which is amazing. However, now we have that better understanding. If it follows a child into the classroom, unfortunately, there is an expectation that a teacher has a duty of care to support that child. And we're not giving them the equipment or the tools or the resources they need to do that. We're expecting them to do what they've been doing for the last however many decades without incremental pay increases that are funded by government, without additional funding for the schools for resources, equipment and knowledge. So no wonder they're on strike. I totally support that.
All right, OK, there you go, Catherine. Thank you very much. Two sides of the coin there, it's fair to say, from Jonathan Gullis, Conservative MP, and then Catherine Warrell, there's a mum of two. Good luck to you, Catherine. I hope childcare manages to continue to sort itself out. Also, what it's worth, Managing Director of the events website, daysout.com, an Altrincham resident, which is wonderful. I wasn't aware of that. I grew up around Altrincham, so there you go. A flashback. Anyway, you're with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. Coming up, now, a failed asylum seeker has been sent to a mental health hospital indefinitely. That is after he killed the 88-year-old woman that he described as his surrogate grandmother. She gave him a home. This is part of, unfortunately, and a very disturbing pattern, actually. I'll be discussing all of this very, very shortly with our very own Mark White. Stay tuned.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance.
Now we're here to represent you.
Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride. Oh, she's on it today! Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
OK, welcome back. Now, a failed Iranian asylum seeker will be sent to a mental health hospital indefinitely after killing an 88-year-old woman who had given him a home in a picturesque Yorkshire village. There is a lot to talk about here, and it is a rather disturbing continuation of an even more disturbing pattern that appears to be taking place in our broken asylum system. Here to talk about the absolute lot of it is Mark White, our Home and Security Editor. Mark, the latest, please.
Yeah, this is Shaheen Darvish Narenjbon, who was an asylum seeker, came here in 2005, lost his permission to stay in the country by 2015, and actually exhausted all of his appeals, we're told, by 2017. But still, for 5 years, he was not removed from the UK and went on to kill a pensioner by the name of Brenda Blaney in a village in North Yorkshire, not far from Scarborough, Thornton Le Dale. This pensioner had befriended the asylum seeker a few years earlier. He was working at a restaurant in Leeds, and they'd formed, according to the court, a sort of grandmother-grandson relationship. She'd opened up her home to him, gave him a bedroom, the use of her car, but on the 5th of January last year, he killed her. He was a paranoid schizophrenic. 3 psychiatrists testified at his trial to say that he'd suffered psychosis for years. Voices in his head had apparently told him to kill this frail elderly woman. She had been on the phone to a local shopkeeper to try and order some groceries. When the line went dead, he tried to call back a dozen times, Patrick, and the police were eventually called to the house and found this poor old dear lying in a pool of blood after being absolutely brutally killed.
Yeah, brutally killed is an understatement, really, unfortunately, given what happened there. Mark, it's not as much of an isolated incident, is it, in Britain's broken asylum system culture that we have at the minute?
No, it's not. There are multiple cases, hundreds, thousands of people, actually, who are foreign-born, either living here legally as immigrants or people that have come into the asylum system, or indeed illegal immigrants that have gone on to commit serious offences. There's some very prominent ones who've committed very serious offences. Just last week, a Bournemouth murder case that we reported on, Lawangin Abdul Rahimzai, was an Afghan asylum seeker who came here claiming to be a 14-year-old boy. He was an adult at the time, but managed to get into our asylum system. And it turns out that actually he'd been convicted in his absence of gunning down 2 people, murdering them in Serbia. He'd also been convicted of drug offences in Norway and Italy, turned down for asylum in Norway, but he found his way into our asylum system and then killed an aspiring Marine last year.
Wasn't he?
In Bournemouth.
He was allowed in school. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah,
he was allowed into a school with young girls.
Absolutely, sitting beside children in a class, even though he was an adult, because he'd lied about his age. Other cases include the Liverpool hospital bomber. Remember, of course, the maternity hospital bombing, which thankfully, when Ahmad al-Swalmin detonated his device, he was the only one that ended up dying. But he was a Jordanian who came was a failed asylum seeker, multiple appeals, and he still hadn't been removed from the country when he detonated that device. Then, of course, there was the horrific incident just after the first lockdown in Reading, in a park there, where 3 men, 6 people in total, were stabbed by this individual, Kari Saldala, a Libyan who also had claimed asylum and was turned down from that, still in the country, murdered 3 people and injured 3 others. And then the Parsons Green bomber, remember in 2017, another case, thankfully, of a device that didn't fully detonate, but it still injured 50-odd people. Well, this man, Ahmed Hassan, came here as a child asylum seeker as well, told the authorities he'd actually been influenced by ISIS, was still in the system, though, when he went on to construct that device and detonate it.
Yeah, indeed, and a shocking catalogue there. Lots of people, rightly, concerned about public safety now as a result of this. If you can be rejected, go through due process, so there's no question marks about, a rush to judgment, there's no question marks about people being unfairly treated, a rush to deportation, far from it. You exhaust all of the possibilities there, and then years later you are still living with someone and you potentially go on and commit this horrendous crime, and the British public have a right to be angry, don't they?
Yeah, I think that's a point worth making in all of these cases is, look, people in this country who are born and bred in this country go on to commit criminal offences, go on to commit very serious crimes, including murder and terrorism sometimes. Absolutely. That happens. The difference here is these are people that have come into this country and in some cases have been rejected and should have been on a flight back out of the country years before they've then gone on to commit very serious offences. And that really speaks to the broken asylum system that we've got. Going back to this man who killed Brenda Blaney last year, we're told that had the Rwanda policy been up and running, then the authorities could have managed to get this person deported to Rwanda to be processed there. Is that true? I'm not so sure. Wow. That's certainly what we're being told. But that's a moot point, really, because the Rwanda policy is mired in legal challenges. It's going nowhere fast, and it's going to be potentially up to the end of this year or beyond before that's finally resolved.
This might sound like an obvious question. Why is it, if somebody is rejected and they've reached the final stages, that they aren't deported? What's the hold-up?
It enters a merry-go-round, sadly, of appeals and counter-appeals, and you have a whole industry here with human rights, charities, lawyers that will act on an individual's behalf. They will say they will act in that person's best interest, but of course there's a well-rehearsed strategy they have that you get turned down from this particular avenue, and there's always another avenue we can explore. And that ekes out the process for months, years, as we know, on multiple cases. And frustratingly, those officials in the Home Office say they can't get these people deported to their home country or another country because of this system that we have in place. They've described it, ministers have described it as a broken asylum system. It's hard to conclude it as anything else.
Mark, thank you very, very much. Mark White, our Home and Security Editor, bringing you the shocking details of that case. Get your views coming in. There's no shortage of them already. I can see them flying into my inbox, gbviews@gbnews.uk. It is absolutely staggering stuff, isn't it, that people can go through all of the due process. No rush to judgment, like I've said, no rush to deportation, far from it. And it does make you wonder, doesn't it, how many lives have to be lost and how many lives have to be impacted on negatively before, frankly, something is done seriously to fix this broken asylum system. Look, coming up, we will cross live to Washington, D.C. We're expecting to hear from the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Be interesting to see what he's got to say. Always is, isn't it? But now, though, it's your latest headlines.
Patrick, thank you. Good afternoon to you. The top stories this hour. Hundreds of thousands of workers are taking part in Walkout Wednesday, but let me interrupt and take you straight to Boris Johnson. Patrick was referring to just there. Washington, D.C. He's been lobbying about the war in Ukraine. Let's tune in.
God bless America for what you have done and are doing to save Ukraine from destruction. I'm, of course, proud of all the efforts made by the United Kingdom and other European allies to support Ukraine, the billions of humanitarian assistance, the NLAW missiles that we sent, the tanks that we're sending. And of course, the real heroes are the people of Ukraine, their troops who are fighting like lions, the families who've put up with suffering and cruelty on a scale not seen since the Second World War. But we all must acknowledge, and I acknowledge the scale of American support, military and financial, and the real possibility, the likelihood even, that without that support and the confidence that American support bred in the Ukrainians, then Putin would have taken Kiev in the blitzkrieg that he planned. And he would have installed a puppet government, and a terrible darkness would have fallen on a young and entirely innocent European democracy. Because we've now seen what Russian occupation means, and we know what's going on in the areas that Russia still occupies. We've seen the horrors that Putin's troops leave behind when they're pushed out. Across the whole of that vast and bitterly resisting country, as it would have been, he would have imposed a police state more vile and dreadful than anything we saw in the former Eastern Bloc. Systematic murder, torture, rape, detention without trial, systematic movement of populations, including children, and all the time, the crazed and a chauvinistic attempt to impose Putin's ideology that Ukraine is not really a country, that, as he thinks, Ukrainian language and culture are folkloric curiosities, and that the primary destiny of the Ukrainian population is to be part of the Russian Federation. And if that tragedy had taken place, and who knows how close we came in those first few weeks, then that would have been the pivotal and the defining moment of the first part of the 21st century. If Putin had won a year ago, as he thought he would, as his generals told him he was going to, indeed, frankly, as our generals, ladies and gentlemen, told him he was going to, then that would have emboldened the Kremlin to increase the intimidation and threats towards every country and region on the fringes of the old Soviet empire. It would have told the Chinese all they need to know about our reluctance to stand up for freedom and democracy in the South China Seas or anywhere. It would have sent a signal to every opportunist autocrat around the world that international borders are fungible and frangible and can be changed by force, and that no one will do a damn thing to stop them. And the guilt for the whole Ukrainian tragedy would then have been upon us all. So God bless America having the guts and the wisdom to help. And I implore you now to follow the logic of what you are all doing and give the Ukrainians the tools to finish the job. Give them the deep fire artillery systems, give them the tanks, give them the planes, because they have a plan. They know what they need to do, and my God, they've shown they have the skill and the bravery to do it. Give them the wherewithal to take back that land bridge and the rest of their country, because the faster they win, the greater the savings in treasure and in lives, and the faster the world economy will bounce back to health. The prize before us is now immense. When Ukraine wins, and they will win, when Putin is pushed back, we will lift the threat of further Russian aggression in Georgia, in Moldova, in the Baltic states, across the whole of Eastern Europe. And by lifting that threat, we end the risk of further economic disruption, like the hikes in the cost of gas and food that have affected people in my country, in the UK, in this country, and around the world. When Ukraine wins, we will have established a new clarity and a new stability in the security architecture of Europe. And we will have ended the fateful ambiguity that in the end encouraged Putin to make his catastrophic mistake. And for a relatively tiny outlay in expenditure, we will have greatly strengthened the entire Euro-Atlantic area. And bear in mind that America's contribution is noble and huge, but it is still only 5 or 6% of the annual US defense budget so far, and has helped to degrade about 20%, some say 50%, of Putin's war machine. And to those who say we may be somehow denuding our own arsenals by giving this support, I say, what is the point in deploying those tanks and planes in North Carolina or North Rhine-Westphalia or Alsace when the Ukrainians could be using them now exactly where they are needed to help assure our collective security for decades? What is the point of having Challenger tanks patrolling the beautiful villages of Wiltshire, which is a very safe area, I can tell you, when the Ukrainians could be using them now to bring this war to an end? Every time we've been asked to intensify our support, we've been met with the same argument that we risk an escalation by Putin. How can we seriously worry about provoking him when we have seen what he will do without the slightest provocation? He isn't mad. He isn't ill. He simply made a historic, that's what I'm afraid all the evidence says, he simply made a historic miscalculation and is struggling to deal with the position in which he has now placed his own country. He won't use nuclear weapons because it would instantly extinguish the last flicker of Chinese support. It would lose him every one of the world's swing voters from India to Africa to Latin America. He would terrify his own people, if he did so, who would live in dread of the consequences for them. He would plunge Russia into such a cryogenic freeze of economic isolation as to make the present sanctions regime seem like a blessing. And it would not even work, because I don't believe for a minute he would stop the Ukrainians from fighting for their hearths and their homes and their families. And so we mustn't fall for this trick of trying to portray, that he does, of trying to portray this conflict as a standoff between a nuclear-armed NATO and a nuclear-armed Russia, because that is not what is happening here. We are seeing a barbaric attack on an innocent country, and we are simply giving the Ukrainians the means to protect themselves, as you might help a neighbor whose house is under attack from an arsonist. Do you give that person a hose and buckets and fire blankets? Yes, you do. And above all, we need to avoid being drawn into Putin's personal psychodrama. We're not here to worry about the next stage of his career or what happens in the Kremlin. We need to stop focusing on Putin and focus entirely on Ukraine, because they are fighting for all of us, everyone in this room. They're fighting for our values, and they have reminded us that those values of freedom and democracy are worth fighting for. So there are no conceivable grounds for delay. Let us end this pipette titration of support and give the Ukrainians the support they need to finish this war in the only way that it can and will be finished, and let us give them those tools now. Thank you all for listening. Thank you for your support for Ukraine.
There we have it. Boris Johnson, the former Prime Minister, speaking to American audiences live from Washington. He said, we're seeing a barbaric attack on an innocent country, referring, of course, to Ukraine. And we are simply giving Ukraine what they need to defend themselves, as you would if your neighbour's house was being attacked. We don't care about Putin's personal psychodrama. The former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson there calling on allies, particularly Americans, to provide Ukraine with more aid to help them sustain and ultimately win the war against Russia.
Thank you very, very much. Look, Polly's just giving you the facts of Boris Johnson's speech there, and we've all heard it. Now, I'm actually going to ask you to suspend the facts for a second and just think about not what he said, but the way he said it, and compare that to where we are at the minute. The Dole Men's Club have taken over, and Boris Johnson, with all his Churchillian bluster, and yes, all of his flaws, is now in Washington, D.C. there, issuing a rallying cry. And yes, all right, there are mixed views on Ukraine, and there are mixed views as to whether or not people think we should be lobbing a load more money and resources towards that particular war. Whatever your views on it are there, listen to the way that Boris Johnson just spoke and compare that to what we've got at Prime Minister's questions on either side of the House today. And I can't help but feel what could have been, ladies and gentlemen. But maybe I'm wrong. What do you think? Anyway, we're moving on from all of that right now, and we're going to talk about another important story, because within the last few minutes, police have revealed the dog at the centre of a fatal attack on a 4-year-old girl in Milton Keynes yesterday was a family pet. They've also named the 4-year-old as Alice Stone. She was mauled to death in a back garden on the same day. An inquest was told that the 28-year-old dog walker, Natasha Johnson, died from multiple bites to her neck by 8 animals in her care. The list goes on, though, ladies and gentlemen. What can we actually do to stop these terrible tragedies from reoccurring? We currently have 13 million dogs in the UK, making them our most commonly owned pet, but there does appear to be, unfortunately, whether or not it's just that people are reporting on it more, I don't know, but there does appear to be, anyway, an increase in the number of dog attacks. Some say that dogs should be assessed by genetics and their appearance, and they're calling for tougher restrictions on existing laws that prohibit certain dog types, while others believe that no dog is inherently genetically dangerous. And frankly, they say that, you know, it's that old line, isn't it, that the dog is as good as the owner. Joining me now is Ira Moss, who is CEO of All Dogs Matter. Great to have you on the show. Look, we do appear to be seeing a worrying uptick in things like dog attacks, etc. Where do you stand on the debate of it's the owner, not the dog, or it's the dog, not the owner?
We sadly are seeing an increase of calls coming through of people wanting to rehome their dogs since just before Christmas, actually. And as you just mentioned, so many more people seem to own dogs now. Everywhere you go, you just see dogs in places that you wouldn't ordinarily see them. So genetically, we believe that it comes down to not just the owner or the genetics, but the training and the work that you put in to work with your dog. So sadly, any dog can bite, whether it be a Chihuahua or a bull, any of the bull breeds, which you just sort of showed. However, obviously the damage or the bite on a large bull breed is going to be a lot more damaging than the bite of perhaps a Chihuahua, if we argue it that way. But what we're seeing are certain bull breeds have become a lot more fashionable, larger breeds that are they're being passed around until we get some legislation for dogs not to be sold or given away online. We are seeing typically most of the calls that we get from families or people that want to rehome their larger bull breeds are actually the families you wouldn't expect to have them. So they're typically younger mums on their own in flats, wanting to rehome dogs of between 1 and 2 years old, which kind of, to us, we're seeing dogs that were bought pre-lockdown or during lockdown for lots and lots of money, and owners who can't afford to take them to vets or take them to training if need be. And those dogs, if they're not being exercised or walked, which a lot of the calls we're getting aren't, a lot of these people are saying, we just haven't got time to walk. I've just had a baby. I've got this dog. I'm in a flat and I can't walk the dog. So a dog of that energy and size, if it is going to get frustrated, is clearly going to be a lot more damaging.
Yeah. Should there be more checks when it comes to anything? You hit the nail on the head there when it came to lockdown. I mean, I knew people who were bored over lockdown, couldn't see an end in sight and thought, I'll get a dog. Now, I can understand the human nature element of that and they wanted something to do, but a dog is a life. And if it's mismanaged and if it's cooped up in a small place, animals have certain instincts, don't they? Not all of those instincts are good.
If you had a child locked in a flat all day long, they're going to go stir crazy and drive us mad.
And this is the other problem, which is unfortunately sometimes you have the double whammy of a dog that frankly maybe is a bit too big and of a certain breed, and not blaming the breeds, but and a few unruly children knocking about as well, and it can be a disaster waiting to happen, can't it? Should people be a bit more responsible when it comes to actually getting a dog?
Totally. I mean, what we'd love, and we don't think it's sadly going to happen, we'd love to see some legislation. If anyone were to go in any of the free sites when this interview ends, You know, I'm not sure if I can mention them, but there's lots of free homing sites. And just look at the dogs that are on offer on there. You may as well just say, do you want to come and get this gun for free? Quite frankly, there's no legislation. Anyone can pick these dogs up. There's even lots of groups saying they're rescue centres, but they're just Facebook groups often who think they're well-meaning by trying to save dogs and get dogs that are online and then just offering them to, quite frankly, anyone that comes along and says, yes, I'll have it. There's just nothing in place to stop this happening. And sadly, I think this is the second case this year. We're on the 1st of February, and this is the second child. Well, this is the first child and the adult, unfortunately, the dog walker the other week that got killed. And sadly, I think this will just continue unless we start doing something now.
Well, look,
the calls we get every day are alarming, really quite alarming.
I can imagine. I know that you do a lot of good work at All Dogs Matter, and I would urge anybody who is thinking of getting a dog or wanting some advice as well to get in touch with you guys, although I am sure you're already inundated, so sorry if you get a spike of phone calls now, but there you go. Ira Moss, CEO there of All Dogs Matter. Thank you, Ira, for shedding some light on that topic. Yes, OK, well, some breaking news to bring you now, ladies and gentlemen. Strap yourselves in. A union source has stated that up to 1,200 jobs could be impacted by a British Steel shake-up as the company plans to axe hundreds of jobs in plans to close its coke ovens in Scunthorpe and will optimise several hundred more. Our business and economics editor, Liam Halligan, can bring you all the latest on this and react to it live with On The Money. Liam, what is the latest?
This isn't great news, Patrick. Around 25,000 people work in the steel industry across the UK. Of course, Scunthorpe in Lincolnshire is a very famous steel plant. And we're hearing, as you say, that British Steel, which is Chinese-owned, is to axe hundreds of jobs to close its coke ovens in Scunthorpe. And it will optimise several hundred more jobs. Now, this comes as ministers were considering a multi-million-pound rescue package for the struggling business. Just last month, Chancellor Jeremy Hunt said there would be more...
Go on, secondly, I'm sorry about this slight mic issue. We'll go back to you. Yes, there we go. So this is the breaking news brought to you in a second anyway by Liam Halligan, our economics and business editor, which is that around 1,200 jobs could be impacted by a British Steel shake-up as the company plans to axe those jobs in plans to close its coke ovens in Scunthorpe, and they will optimise several hundred more. Liam, as you were.
Sorry, we got rid of the gremlins. So about 25,000 people still work in the steel industry across the UK. It's a major employer, often in areas where it's one of the biggest employers. Scunthorpe in Lincolnshire has obviously been a centre of steel making in the UK for, decades. The Chinese-owned company, British Steel, says it's axing up to 1,200 jobs. We do know, though, Patrick, that the government was in talks to announce some kind of support package for the struggling steelmaker. Not really struggling, it's got a massive Chinese conglomerate behind it. But anyway, big steelmakers do often try and extract money from the government. Just last month, Jeremy Hunt said there'll be some support forthcoming. This may be, it's awful to talk about it in this way, it's very transactional, these are people's livings. It may be that the steelmaker is putting the hard sell on the government. Maybe these job losses could be reversed if there is support there. I've often said that's what's happening up at the British Volt factory, British Volt going down, producing a gigafactory. That's the plan up near Blythe in the northeast. There's a lot of this going on at the moment, industrial policy. It may be that this is part of that behind-the-scenes negotiation.
Yeah, absolutely, quite possibly. And you're right to say you did bring that to our attention last week. Well, a few times, actually, it's fair to say. But also, the Bank of England is poised to raise interest rates for the 10th time in a row tomorrow. What can you tell me about that?
Yeah, I'll be on GB News Breakfast Show tomorrow talking about this at noon. We are going to hear from the Bank of England, the Monetary Policy Committee, the 9 economists who set the interest rates. We've had 9 rises in a row. At the beginning of this year, interest rates were still on sort of emergency, COVID lockdown levels, way under 1%. They're now 3.5%, having gone up in increments. That means mortgage costs have been going up, other borrowing costs as well. Good news for savers, but not good if you've got lots of debt. I now think the Bank of England will raise interest rates tomorrow, Patrick, from 3.5% to 4%. But I do think there won't be many interest rate rises after that. I'm predicting that interest rates will peak at 4.25% a couple of months later. And then towards the back end of this year, interest rates will flatten out and inflation will start to come down quite rapidly. So this means if you are lucky enough to be a homeowner and you've got a mortgage, I wouldn't refix your mortgage now. I'd wait till interest rates, even though they're going to go up once or twice more, are in a firmly downward trajectory towards the end of the year. That's what I think.
And if you're looking to get on the market as well, potentially try to wait it out a bit to the end of the year.
Potentially, we heard from the Halifax today, and I know you're, with all respect, you're in this position. We've talked about it before. You know, young professional person trying to get on the housing ladder. We have seen a fall in house prices, according to the Halifax, since August, but it's only about 3% across the country, which isn't a huge amount, to be honest. And we've had, the worst of the interest rate rises, probably the worst of the economic slowdown, and we've only seen a 3% fall in house prices. I think house prices will even out, flatten. I think there'll be a small correction rather than a sort of 2008 style collapse or a crash, even though I totally understand a lot of first-time buyers want to see that house price collapse. I'm afraid there just aren't enough homes. I don't see it happening.
Yeah, good stuff. Liam, thank you very much. Liam Halligan, our economics and business editor, bringing you the very latest on all of that breaking news initially anyway, and then, of course, interest rates after that. Make sure you tune in right here on GB News tomorrow, because Liam will be bringing you the reaction to it, as indeed it's all announced, and previewing it, of course, as well. Now, loads of you have been getting in touch. gbviews@gbnews.uk. That shocking case of the failed asylum seeker who went on to kill an 88-year-old lady in her own home, a home that she had taken him into. I was asking you, why on earth is this allowed to happen? Should we not be deporting people immediately when it comes to their asylum seeker case being failed? Jax says, absolutely awful. This elderly lady was killed by a failed asylum seeker who had been here for 7 years. Really? Why 7 years? The system needs to be overhauled now so that failed asylum seekers are deported within a few weeks of their application being rejected. I think most people, common sense, would say yes, absolutely. I will have more on that case and also, of course, more on the strikes as well when I come back. As it turns out, 7 million kids are off school today.
Hello again, it's Aidan McGivern here from the Met Office. Increasingly cloudy for most of us over the next 24 hours. That cloud bringing some outbreaks of rain in places, but it will also bring milder air with it. The air coming in around an area of high pressure, west to southwesterly winds. And of course, at this time of year, those winds are relatively mild, helped by the fact that a warm front is crossing the UK. That's going to bring a milder spell, but also a lot of cloud and some outbreaks of rain. The rain mainly focused across parts of Scotland, outbreaks of rain on and off through the night. Northern Ireland, likewise, a few spells of rain into northern England at times. 1 or 2 spots couldn't be ruled out for the Welsh mountains, but elsewhere across England and Wales, largely dry, albeit relatively cloudy. And for the vast majority, it is frost-free, although chillier conditions in the far northeast ahead of the rain. That rain does push northeast as we start off Thursday, wet weather arriving into Shetland and Orkney, but it's persisting across the West Highlands, and the Northwest Highlands in particular will see some very soggy weather over the next 36 hours. Elsewhere across the country, generally cloudy, a few spots of rain across western hills and coasts, but otherwise mostly dry and mild. This west to southwesterly wind bringing temperatures of 10 to 13 Celsius widely up and down the country. But it does stay wet across Scotland, especially later Thursday. Overnight, eventually the rain turns more showery and some clearer conditions into the far north. There'll also be a few light outbreaks of rain pushing into western parts of England, Wales, Northern Ireland. Another cloudy night across the board, and as a result, frost-free as we start off Friday. In fact, it's really quite mild first thing Friday, 9 to 10 Celsius in places, but it's also grey, and the lowest cloud will be over northern and western hills with further outbreaks of rain crossing Scotland. Not as heavy or as persistent on Friday, and into the weekend another spell of rain for the far north, but eventually that clears to sunnier skies, albeit with chillier conditions for Sunday.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back. Eamon Holmes, back on the TV
Surprised
with me this morning.
even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes. Already to bless.
Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
Every weekend, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Bigger and better, starting at 8 p.m. Friday and Saturday.
Can't be too safe. Bring it on. Has there ever been a more innuendo feature?
And Sundays, we're on at 9.
It's ridiculous. Just get on with it. Maybe you should get a proper job.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You're with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. And coming up, it's a strikeout out there. The biggest strike action in a decade is underway. 500,000 workers walking out. It's costing our economy billions. It could be argued that it's even costing lives. We've got 7 trade unions on picket lines. Teachers, civil servants, trains, buses, security staff, to name but a few. And it's not ending anytime soon because they all want more money and the government is saying, well, we haven't got any money. I will be asking the questions that, frankly, many broadcasters are too afraid to ask, to MPs, to union leaders and, of course, to striking workers as well. More deadly asylum seeker madness. A failed Iranian asylum seeker who should have been removed from the UK years ago has been sentenced today for brutally killing an elderly woman who had given him a home. How many more innocent people have to die before something is done about this nonsense? Our Home and Security Editor will have the very latest. And could the government soon be coming to inspect your toilet? Yes, you heard. More details on that before 6 o'clock. Get in touch, gbviews@gbnews.uk. How do we end these strikes? Give me solutions, not problems, people. How do we end these strikes? Come on, solve it for us. I'm sick of it. And should failed asylum seekers be deported immediately? 2 big questions for you. I want to hear from you on both. gbviews@gbnews.uk. But right now, it's your headlines with Polly.
Thank you and good evening to you. Well, as you've been hearing on GB News throughout today, hundreds of thousands of workers are taking part in Walkout Wednesday. It's the biggest day of industrial action in the UK for more than a decade. Up to 500,000 workers across 7 trade unions are all striking over pay, jobs and conditions. Teachers are part of the action, along with Border Force officers and bus and train drivers, which has caused widespread travel disruption. The Education Secretary, Gillian Keegan, says they'll continue constructive talks with unions.
They didn't break down, but they basically said very clearly, look, we can't do anything to stop this strike. This is going ahead on the 1st of February, but we do have 28 days between this and the next strike, so we will continue those discussions. But what we can't do is offer inflation busting, pay rises, because we're really focused on getting inflation down and halving the inflation for everybody, so we all feel better and have more money in our pockets.
But Kevin Courtney, the General Secretary of the National Education Union, says the government needs to find the money.
They never thought we'd reach these thresholds. They weren't planning on us reaching them. And since we've reached the thresholds, 40,000 more people have joined the union as well. So it does show there's a huge strength of feeling in the profession that government must act and put things right. I think Gillian Keegan is hoping that the strike won't be effective and there won't be any further action. There could be further action. She needs to do a deal so that that doesn't happen.
Well, amidst the ongoing strikes, the Trades Union Congress has handed a petition to Downing Street opposing the government's plans for a new level of minimum service during times of strikes. The petition against the so-called strikes bill was signed by more than 200,000 members of the public. The government says it'll continue to hold talks with the unions, but the TUC General Secretary Paul Novak says he hopes the ongoing strikes will send a strong message to the government about the anger the public is also feeling.
They're trying to push through what is a particularly spiteful piece of legislation. Now, we've had hundreds of thousands of public sector workers take strike action, quite often for the first time ever. And instead of listening to the concerns of those workers or responding to the concerns, the government has just tried to introduce legislation to make it more difficult for them to take that strike action. So I think the government should be more responsible, should talk to their workforce, should talk to unions and come to the table on public sector pay.
Meanwhile, in the Commons today, the Prime Minister's been busy denying being too weak to root out sleaze from his government. Sir Keir Starmer made the claim during PMQs, citing a string of recent allegations. He said Rishi Sunak must have known about the HMRC's investigation into Nadeem Zahawi at the time he appointed him party chair. He also accused Mr Sunak of forcing people to work for a bully.
The Deputy Prime Minister was facing 24 separate allegations of bullying. According to recent reports, some of the complainants were physically sick. One says they were left suicidal. How would he feel if one of his friends or relatives was being forced to work for a bully simply because the man at the top was too weak to do anything about it?
Well, Rishi Sunak responded by saying Sir Keir Starmer had supported the spread of hate, as he called it, while Jeremy Corbyn was Labour leader.
When I was made aware of formal complaints, I instructed a leading independent KC to conduct an investigation because I take action when these things happen. But what did he say at the weekend? He said at the weekend that hate had been allowed to spread unchallenged in the Labour Party under his predecessor. He was speaking as if he wasn't even there. But he was sitting right next to him, supporting him for 4 long years.
House prices now, and they've fallen for the 5th month in a row, down by 0.6% on December. Nationwide's house price index shows the average home now costs just over £258,000. Annual price growth slowed to 1.1% in January, and that comes as the Bank of England is poised to raise interest rates for the 10th consecutive time. CEO of Generation Home Will Rice told GB News what trends we're seeing.
Yesterday, the Bank of England also disclosed that the number of mortgage approvals was at 35,000 in December. So if you look at where were we 5 months ago, that number is down from about 65 to 70,000. And then if you break out remortgaging from purchase, remortgages are doing a lot better. So the purchase numbers are down considerably more than 50%.
Now, in the United States, the FBI is searching President Joe Biden's beach house in Delaware as part of an ongoing investigation into his handling of classified documents. His lawyer says the operation was carried out with the consent of Biden's legal team. The FBI searched one of Biden's homes in Delaware last month after his team found classified documents there. His former private office was also searched in November. You're up to date on GB News. More news as it happens. Back now to Patrick.
OK, let's rattle through this final hour, ladies and gents. Hundreds of thousands of workers have walked out today on what is the biggest day of strike action the UK has seen for decades. About 500,000 of them, apparently. Teachers in England and Wales, represented by the National Education Union, have walked out. A poll by the Association of School and College Leaders earlier suggested the majority of schools have been affected by today's teacher walkouts. But, of course, it's not just school teachers. University lecturers have also joined train drivers, civil servants, bus drivers and security guards, with an estimated 500,000 workers walking out in increasingly bitter disputes over pay, jobs and conditions. Our national reporter, Ellie Costello, has been at a teachers' rally in London. We're going to get to that and then afterwards as well. I'm going to be speaking to someone who is a big trade unionist. That should be interesting, but let's take Ellie's package first.
Well, the
Teachers here are swapping the classroom for the pavement today. Thousands of them have turned out in a protest over pay and conditions. They're heading to Westminster to have their voices heard.
Teaching's never been easy, but now it's kind of coming to a point where I need a bit of respect for the things. I'm not a martyr, I don't do this, to be a martyr. I do it because I love the job, but it's coming to a point where I'm not sure how much I can love it for the lack of monetary respect, I suppose.
So are you surprised by the turnout today? How many people have come to have their voices heard?
No, absolutely not. People are mad. They're showing it. They've come out in mass numbers to say, this is what we need and this is why we're unhappy. It's been a long time coming. We've had lots of discussions about it in our unions before we even got to this stage. So all the difficult thinking was done ages ago, really. It's now the time.
And it is a wonderful, wonderful profession to be in, but we need to be supported by enough funding coming into education because it's broken at the moment. I mean, this is one of our reps running a picket line this morning, and I'm sure she would absolutely confirm that the public support on picket lines has been absolutely amazing. Parents and just the general public. So, yeah.
Well, it's thought that the teachers' strike will be the most disruptive strike action that we've seen this winter. The NEU says that 150,000 members of staff will be walking out in England and Wales. That will affect thousands of schools across the country. And if those talks don't pick up in the next few weeks, we could see another 6 days of teachers walking out from the classroom.
I think that was an advert for homeschooling, if ever I've seen one. We had a teacher with blue hair and a bolt in her nose, a child draped in a rainbow-coloured flag, and a union rep who didn't want to appear on camera. But there you go. Political reporter Olivia Utley is in Downing Street for us now. Olivia, thank you very much. Yes, widespread strikes, not just the teachers. It's Walkout Wednesday, isn't it? What's the government going to do about it?
Yes, it's Walkout Wednesday, and an hour ago, a couple of hours ago, as we heard in the bulletins, there were a group of union representatives coming to deliver a petition to Downing Street, and that petition is essentially telling the Prime Minister to drop his minimum service legislation, which has now made its way through the Commons and is going into the Lords. Now, the TUC say that unified strike action, coordinated strike action is justified because of this legislation. And it's this sort of coordinated action which the government has been absolutely dreading. What the ministers were planning to do is to negotiate with different unions and reach different deals, depending in part at least on public sympathy. So we know that sympathy for teachers is very high, but sympathy for train drivers is pretty low. And it was thought that the Prime Minister could agree one deal with ASLEF, the train drivers union, which might not be as generous as the deal that would be reached with the teachers union. But when we see this sort of coordinated strike action, making separate deals gets harder, which puts the government in a very tricky position, because as we heard from Gillian Keegan, the last thing they want is these inflation-busting pay rises across the board. That would mean that inflation would spiral out of control, so the government argues. And that is looking more and more like the sort of deal which they might have to strike in the end. Just to put it in perspective, civil servants, 100,000 civil servants walked out today, and the government says that agreeing to the deal that civil servants are asking for, a 10% pay rise, would amount to a £2.6 billion bill for the government. Now, that's the size of the entire levelling up fund that was announced last year. So the government is in a very, very tricky situation. And let's not forget, today is Rishi Sunak's 100th day in office. The spotlight is very much on him, and the onus is on him to find a way out of these strikes.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a question of cost, isn't it, realistically? And the government is now saying, well, it would cost us around 28 billion quid, as you were reporting there. You work that out per household. It's rather a lot of money. And I think when people see it in those terms, whether or not they would still continue to back whopping great big pay rises, especially in light of public sector pension pots as well. Olivia, I'll leave it there. Thank you very much. Olivia Utley, our political reporter outside Downing Street for us. Our London reporter, Lisa Hartle, joins us now, and it has been focusing on the train drivers' strikes, I understand. Lisa, thank you very, very much. What's the latest where you are, then, when it comes to train drivers? They're off as well. We're walking home.
So I've been talking to businesses and the impact that they're feeling with everything else going on against businesses at the moment, the impact that the strikes are having. And in particular, the businesses I've been talking to around central London say it's the train strikes that are actually having the biggest impact on them, because obviously their staff can't come into work, footfall drops dramatically, and it's really difficult for them to plan ahead and know what's coming up. And of course, when there's going to be more industrial action taking place. So I spoke to the Federation of Federation of Small Businesses earlier, and this is what they had to say.
So we've seen evidence now that around 15 to 20% of small businesses now say they've been affected by the strikes. This was primarily in December, when you had the combination of raw mail strikes, which are really big for small businesses, and also train strikes. So now they're looking at this spring going, well, if it's 20% of small businesses, that's roughly about 800 to 900,000 small businesses affected. So that is finding difficulty of getting their customers, or getting their supplies, or just generally trading. I think at the start of this, with the individual industrial disputes, I think people have sympathy with those who are withdrawing their labour. I mean, everyone should have the right to withdraw their labour. That's absolutely baked in. However, now that these strikes are being coordinated, now that disruption is growing, now that there is days like today with multiple different sectors on strike at once, I think that sympathy is beginning to wane.
I spoke to some of the local businesses around central London and asked them what they thought of the strike. Some were supportive and understood why people were striking, but others said at a time when it's difficult for so many people, they couldn't give their sympathy or support at the moment for these strikes.
Yes, indeed. All right, thank you very, very much. Lisa Hartler, GB News' London reporter, focusing on the impact of businesses, predominantly there from the train driver strike. I'm joined now by Jerry Hicks, who's a trade unionist. He's in Bristol, I believe. Jerry, thank you very much. How are you?
I'm well, Patrick, and you?
Yes, I'm good. I'm pleased you're not striking today. It means I can actually get to talk to you. It's fantastic. I want to focus a little bit on the teachers, because I think it's the most emotive probably for a lot of our viewers and our listeners, especially those with kids. From where I'm sitting, I think it's a bit cheeky that teachers are going on strike. Average teacher's salary around 42 grand. A pension, 23.6% paid into their pension. The average in the private sector is 3%. Why don't they forego some of their pension payments and have more of a salary up front and then go back to teaching the kids?
Well, I don't accept the figure of £42,000. My daughter-in-law was a teacher. She earned a lot less than that. She walked away from education. That's the problem. That's the problem here. Is there's a crisis of retention and recruitment. People are walking away. They wouldn't be walking away if the monies were so generous as you were suggesting.
I'm sorry, but that's the figure from the sense. You don't have to. It doesn't matter, with respect, Jerry, whether or not you recognise that as the figure. That is the figure. The Centre for Policy Studies has come out and said this is the figure. The research suggests that is the figure. And look, just talking of research, we did have a clip earlier on from a civil servant who was saying, "Oh, people in the civil service are going to food banks." And I hear a lot about teachers going to food banks, nurses going to food banks. What are the actual figures on the number of public sector workers going to food banks?
Well, I've not got the absolute figures. You need to ask the people in those industries. They would know only too well. But what I know is teachers' assistants are on paltry money. They're being asked to carry out teachers' jobs. You know, Gillian Keegan, the educational minister, is on £12,500 a month. That's a year's salary for a teaching assistant. I'd rather have 12 teaching assistants than one Gillian Keegan. The crisis is 25% are leaving education, teachers, after 3 years of qualifying, 33% after 5 years. They're not doing this because of all those riches that are bestowed on them, like you're saying.
No, I'm not saying it's riches.
Now, they are parents. Mum's Net poll are parents. 66% said they supported the teachers' strike. And that means 33% don't support Gillian Keegan in her condemnation for it.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, actually, because I had a representative from Mumsnet saying the exact opposite earlier on a different news channel, but that is fair enough. Now, I'm not saying certainly that they've got bestowed in riches. What I am saying is I think a lot of people would find it quite hard to understand that somebody who gets 12 or 13 weeks holiday a year, the 6th best in the world are our teachers, by the way, the 6th best in the world, 23.5% pension contribution as well. It is actually not the dire straits that a lot of people are talking about. And is it worth parents having to suffer and their kids having to suffer, people missing hospital appointments? In fact, I just want to play you a little clip, actually. It's Annette Kello, who's a single parent, she's a freelance journalist. She found out about the strikes a few days ago. She's not been able to get childcare and she missed a hospital appointment. Just take a listen to this.
Obviously, it throws a spanner in the works for single parents, particularly myself, who has a child who has a disability. So it's very difficult getting childcare for him. And I also had a hospital appointment today, which I wasn't allowed to bring a child to, which has now been cancelled, which I'm sure with the NHS and everything going on will be a long time until I get back to that appointment. So I think it's a knock-on effect in all areas. And who knows if I would have even been able to get to the appointment with the bus strike. So it's pretty bad for everybody.
So they're saying they want more money, the people in the public sector. The government has come out and said, in order to do so, it would cost us £28 billion. We haven't got that money, and the average taxpayer doesn't have that money. What's your solution, Jerry? Where do we find this money?
OK, well, then you've really phrased 3 questions along with the clip you've just paid. I have sympathy with anyone who's struggling to find childcare, but schools aren't childcare facilities. Schools are there for education. Primary school classes are the highest in Europe. Secondary school classes sizes are the highest since records began. When it comes to money, though, bankers' bonuses has just been allowed to let rip. There used to be a thing talked about. It's not so much now. It should be financial transactions tax. That's 0.1% tax on every transaction it takes place on the stock market. It would raise tens of billions. 1.5% levy on the wealthiest of more than £5 million would raise £16 billion.
So here we have it. Yeah, but Jerry, this is the point. But
Richard Branson is so rich, he spends oodles of money on a space fantasy.
Yes, now I guess all of this, right? But the problem is, Jerry, we've kind of unearthed the issue here, haven't we? Which is the solution is basically a radical form of socialism, is it not, in your view?
No, I'm a socialist, so I might agree with socialism. But there's 1 million job vacancies in the UK. Coincidentally, since Brexit, there's 1 million fewer European workers. That's 1 million jobs that should be paying 1 million taxes. That would be hundreds of millions of pounds in tax. 1 million job vacancies. Think about it, Patrick. 100,000 job vacancies in the NHS. They should be filled and they should be working, paying tax and just paying money on the high street. By the way, I was in Bristol today and the shopping centre was very full because the kids were there shopping.
Just because we're a bit pressed for time, Jerry, I'm going to have to just rein it back in a bit because I did ask you what you thought the solution was, and it did appear to be radical socialism, and now we've ended up on a high street in Bristol. So what is the solution? Is it, realistically, if you're being honest, tax the living heck out of the rich? Because if you do, they'll leave, and then we've got no one to tax.
Right. If you think the living heck is 1.5%, if you think the living heck is...
But they're already paying about 50%, aren't
financial transaction tax. And there's more billionaires now, Patrick, that's the truth, than ever before. The gap between rich and poor is greater than ever. I'm not talking about taxing the living daylights out of them, just shoulder some of the burden. It's Walkout Wednesday, 500,000, not because they can necessarily afford it, but they're desperate to have their voices heard with a washed-out government who just seems to blame everybody else apart from themselves.
OK, look, Jerry, thank you very much. I do always enjoy our back and forths, mate, and it is always actually quite nice to hear a Bristol accent, even if I do quite vehemently disagree with a lot of what comes out of your mouth, but thank you very much, Jerry. Jerry Hicks there, he's a trade unionist. There you go, let's just... But look, for me, it just always seems to pretty much descend straight away into the fact they're not being paid enough. How do we pay them more? Well, we tax the living daylights out of the rich, don't we? But there we go. What do you think? Hey, maybe I'm wrong. GBviews at gbnews.uk. Anyway, you're with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News, obviously. Coming up, a failed asylum seeker has been sent to a mental health hospital indefinitely, and that is after he killed the 88-year-old woman he described as a surrogate grandmother who gave him a home. I'll be back in a moment.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not
believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are... Those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back. Eamon Holmes, back on the TV with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes. Already to bless.
Yeah. Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio,
with the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Yeah, Patrick Christys here on GB News. Ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, that breaking news ticker has just gone on the screen because it's something that we found out during that last advert break. Here to tell us more is Mark White, our Home and Security Editor. What's going on?
Well, this is reports of another refugee and asylum seeker from Eritrea who has just been convicted, sent to a mental health institution for an indefinite period for stabbing to death a 60-year-old man in Oxford Circus in central London on the 1st of July last year. This young man, Teddy Fanta Hagos, had travelled from Swansea to carry out this attack. No motivation for it. He was assessed by psychiatrists as being mentally ill, mentally unfit. And that's why he's been sent to a psychiatric unit for an indefinite period. But his victim, Stephen Dempsey, had been in Oxford Circus from Leigh-on-Sea, unsuspecting, of course, didn't realise there was no argument or anything. He was just stabbed at random. There was dramatic images at the time that passers-by had captured on the mobile phones of this young Eritrean being wrestled to the ground, concerned that it might have been a terrorist attack at that point, but that's been ruled out. He was, we're told, a refugee who'd travelled from Swansea, where he was living at that time, to London. No motivation ever given for the attack, but another very worrying case.
Yes, indeed. We'll be returning to that, no doubt. But of course, Mark, it comes on the same day as another big story that you're bringing us, and tragically, some similarities here. Yeah,
this was an Iranian asylum seeker who had been turned down through his appeals to remain here as an asylum seeker and had not been removed from the country. This individual, Shaheen Darvish Naranjbon, went on then to kill an 88-year-old woman, Brenda Blaney, who had taken him in and given him food and shelter, had opened up a bedroom to him, had given him the use of her car. She lived in North Yorkshire, near Scarborough, in the village there, and she'd befriended this man in Leeds. And over a period of years, they'd grown closer, a grandmother-grandson type relationship, it was described in court. And the house there, she decided to allow him to lodge with her. But last year, in March last year, he had a psychotic episode, apparently, and murdered, or killed her, I should say, stabbed her to death and strangled her in that home. Now, some serious questions, of course, for Home Office officials as to why this individual was not removed from the UK, having been turned down for asylum in 2017. He'd come here in 2005, Patrick, and his permission to remain in the UK had run out in 2015. He then applied for asylum. That avenue of appeal was exhausted 2 years later. But we're now told from officials that there was an impending challenge again, another appeal against that refusal to grant him asylum in 2020. So it just shows you this merry-go-round of appeals, rejections, more appeals as the lawyers get to grips with these things and, you know, try lots of different avenues to ensure that an individual remains in this country.
And this is where we're at, isn't it? Where it's absolutely vitally important that we have due process and that we have a legal system and that we have a rule of law and all of this stuff. But at what cost when it comes to the series of different rejections that somebody can go through? Presumably as well, in some cases, the series of resentments that an individual will build up to a nation once they're being repeatedly rejected from being allowed to live here, and the fact that it is clearly, as is evidenced in numerous different cases that we're speaking about here, putting lives at risk.
Yeah, I mean, to absolutely be fair on this, of course, people from this country who are born and brought up in this country go on, and some of them commit crimes, some very serious crimes indeed. The difference here is that you have a clear, demonstrable case where an individual should not have been in this country, having been rejected on whatever grounds to remain here through the asylum system or whatever other immigration system they were trying to remain in the UK for. And they should have been removed years before they've then gone on to commit a very serious offence. And as a consequence, a sweet old woman, 88-year-old, who had in the very best of intentions, thrown her home open to this asylum seeker, is then killed. It is utterly tragic. There are questions, and it goes and points to the very thing that ministers openly admit, which is that we have a broken asylum system.
Yeah, indeed. Mark, look, thank you very much, in a way, for bringing us that. Mark White there, our Home and Security editor. Look, we started the day with that particular case, as Mark was alluding to, of the failed Iranian asylum seeker who was told he's going to have to spend a heck of a long time indefinitely in a mental institution as a result of killing the 88-year-old woman brutally and savagely, by the way, who had taken him into her own home. And just while we were in the last advert break before we came to Mark there, we got that latest breaking news that another individual with mental health problems as well will spend another amount of time in a mental hospital after stabbing a chap in London, and a lot of you in the inbox right now, gbviews@gbnews.uk, and I'm going to go to your inbox very, very shortly, by the way, and your emails and your views on this. I've been asking you what you think about the length of time it takes to deport someone when they have had their asylum claim failed. I will go to that very shortly. We'll be debating it when we come back. So make sure you stay tuned, because the other side of the news, we're going to go to your views, and we are going to be asking the very serious question to our debate panel as to whether or not you think now that it is a threat to national security. All of that coming your way and much more.
Patrick, thank you. The headlines this hour: hundreds of thousands of workers have been taking part in so-called Walkout Wednesday today. It's the UK's biggest day of industrial action in more than a decade. Up to 500,000 people across 7 trade unions went on strike over pay, jobs and conditions. Teachers took part in the action, along with Border Force officials, bus and train drivers as well, which caused some travel disruption. It's been confirmed that the 4-year-old girl Alice Stones, who died in a dog attack in Milton Keynes, was killed by a family pet, with Thames Valley Police describing it as a tragic and isolated incident. No arrests have been made, and Superintendent Mark Tarbett says they're now working to establish the breed of the dog.
We currently believe that this was a tragic, isolated incident, and there is no threat to the wider community. Accordingly, no arrests have been made at this time. I can confirm that the dog was a family pet and was put down by police at the scene yesterday evening. And part of the investigation is to establish the breed of that dog. While our investigation takes place, there will be more officers in the area over the coming days.
In the last hour, if you've been watching GB News, you'll have seen Boris Johnson urging Western leaders to further boost their support for Ukraine. Speaking in Washington, he told senior politicians that President Volodymyr Zelensky should be given all the equipment he needs to win the war against Russia. He's asked them to supply fighter jets, which Downing Street has so far ruled out.
So God bless America for having the guts and the wisdom to help. And I implore you now to follow the logic of what you are all doing and give the Ukrainians the tools to finish the job. Give them the deep fire artillery systems, give them the tanks, give them the planes, because they have a plan. They know what they need to do, and my God, they've shown they have the skill and the bravery to do it.
Speaking in Washington, you're up to date on TV, online and DAB+ radio. You're with GB News. We're back in just a moment.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions. I have no time for cultural totalitarianism. We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online. across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion, and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every weekend, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Bigger and better, starting at 8 p.m. Friday and Saturday.
Can't be too safe. Bring it on. Has there ever been a more innuendo feature?
And Sundays, we're on at 9.
It's ridiculous. Just get on with it. Maybe you should get a proper job.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Now, back to that failed Iranian asylum seeker who should have been removed from the UK years ago, who will be sent to a mental hospital indefinitely after killing an elderly woman who had given him a home. 34-year-old Shaheen Darvish Naranjbon, who suffers from paranoid schizophrenia, has been sentenced at Leeds Crown Court this afternoon. Lots of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts on this, and in fact, in the last few minutes, news broke as well that another asylum seeker stabbed an individual to death in London. He has been sent to a mental institution as well, a mental hospital, I should say. Jackie says, there seems to be a growing number of cases of people killed by failed asylum seekers recently. I think that people need to start suing the government for these murders. They are causing it, this is Jackie's view, of course, by their negligence and protracted processing. Now, look, for what it's worth in this particular case, the government and the Home Office, etc., will say that they admit it's a broken asylum system and they want to do everything that they can to try to rectify it. But it doesn't take a genius to work out, does it? If somebody spends 5, or in one of the cases here, 7 years being told repeatedly that, nope, you're not going to be given leave to remain, no, you're not going to be given asylum, then actually resentments can build up. Or, of course, just the simple fact of the matter is, do we necessarily need people coming over here who actually do have serious mental disorders? Your views, of course, gbviews at gbnews.uk. But increasing numbers in my inbox, anyway, of people saying, yes, actually, it is time to start thinking about how can we sue people as a result of all of this. Martin says, I truly believe, due to this country's shambolic and broken asylum system run by Liberals, Martin's view again, where proper checks and balances are not in place, innocent people will suffer. These tragic and preventable events will become a more regular occurrence. Now, it is important to say that these are massively in a minority when it comes to the cases, but they are cases nonetheless. And I think, Martin, you hit the nail on the head there when you said these tragic and preventable events will become a more regular occurrence. They are preventable, aren't they? It cannot be right in a functioning society that we have a merry-go-round of legal process on top of legal process on top of legal process that results in people, unfortunately, like an 88-year-old woman being battered to death in her own home. Amy says the government has blood in its hands. Thoughts go out to the elderly lady who took this horrible man into her home. I just can't help but feel as though this is a national security threat. If we do not know, in many cases, exactly where certain people are from or exactly what their situation is, or indeed their age, for example, how on earth can we be sure that we are protecting citizens who are already here, well-meaning citizens, like the tragic case of the 88-year-old lady who took this chap in to her own home? So, in light of that, are failures in the asylum system a threat to our communities? Joining me now is Refugee and Asylum Rights Director at Amnesty International UK. It's Steve Valdo-Simmons, and journalist and former MEP Patrick O'Flynn. Thank you very, very much. Patrick, I will start with you. Is our current asylum setup a threat to public safety and national security?
Well, yes, it obviously is. And, even anecdotally in the last few weeks, we are seeing more cases come through of failed asylum seekers or just asylum seekers stuck in the system, guilty of some very serious crimes, including murders and rapes. And, it should not come as a surprise, by the way, that if we're taking in 90% of our asylum seekers as young men, that you are going to get an associated crime aspect to that, because in general terms, young men commit by far high volume of crime in society generally. And if you're bringing in further to that young men from countries and cultures that have not accepted, for instance, female emancipation or gay rights, or have, Islamist issues, then that can feed through into other types of very serious crime as well. And the Home Office doesn't really keep comprehensive statistics on this as regards asylum seekers. But we do know, for instance, that the number of foreign national offenders in our prison system has almost doubled in the last 20 years. And where it was about 1 in 12, 1 in 13 offenders, it's now more like 1 in 8. So that does tell you there is a very serious wave of criminality going on.
OK. Steve Valdez-Simmons here from Amnesty International UK. I'll bring you in. I think a lot of people are rightly concerned that, realistically, we have no idea how many people are currently in this country who are failed asylum seekers, potentially with mental health problems, who could have violent tendencies. That's a concern.
Well, you and I don't know the number of people in the country who are refused asylum seekers. The Home Office ought to, because, of course, people who've sought asylum, unlike perhaps other people, are people who have been in touch and engaged with the Home Office and the authorities. So they are known, and indeed, through the asylum system, they're generally required to be accommodated in certain places. They're completely or very much constrained and confined, and oftentimes, because they're not permitted to work and not permitted to support themselves, even after refusal, they're controlled by the Home Office in terms of where they are living. So I think you were right to point out earlier that these are a small number of cases and not representative of everybody in the system. Is it true that the less well the system is managed, the less effective it is, that is certainly not the safest thing for society generally? Of course that's true. But the answer is not to smear people seeking asylum. It's to run an efficient and effective system.
Well, exactly. And I'll tell you what, before I throw it back to Patrick, I'll just stick with you on this then, Steve. A lot of people would say we've got this massive backlog now. We don't want any more cases. The obvious solution to this would be to cut back on the number of people who are coming over right now so we can get our own house in order, Steve.
Well, I think we have to be more realistic than that. Firstly, we ought to recognise that the reason we have such huge backlogs is not because of the numbers of people who've arrived and claimed.
Well, it is.
It's because the Home Office, I know we've talked about this before, but it's fact, that the Home Office has decided, the Home Secretary and the predecessor of her decided to stop processing the claims.
I get that,
of course
but it's also got, but it has also, Steve, got to do with record numbers of people coming here, to be fair. It is both of those things. But I do see, Steve, I'll go back to you, Patrick. I just wanted you to respond to what Steve has said there.
My view, and I think now the Home Secretary's view, is we have to get away from the idea of anyone who manages to pitch up and arrives in Britain illegally being able to lodge a claim for asylum. We should do offshore processing. The Prime Minister is committed. I don't know quite how he's going to implement it, but he's committed to ensuring if you arrive here illegally, you can't claim asylum and you can't stay. That has to be right. And on the other hand, we should be deciding via perhaps a UN agency who most merits asylum in our country up to a certain cap, perhaps 20,000 a year, and we should be taking them from UN refugee camps and places contiguous to war zones, and we should be making sure that there's a fair representation of women and children, the most needy people, rather than whoever's been able to play the system and win through in this kind of bizarre Hunger Games system we have at the moment, and is able to get a boat across the channel, get picked up and come to our shores and never leave. Now, it's not surprising that that cohort seems to include a number of extremely ruthless young men.
Steve, I'll throw it back over to you on this. The government's line on this, anyway, part of it is that had we been allowed to put people on flights to Rwanda... By the way, I don't buy this, Steve, for what it's worth, but they're saying that if we'd have been allowed to put people on a flight to Rwanda, then this chap probably wouldn't have been here. How they can know that, I don't know. But that is their line, and it ties into if we were more efficient at deporting people, then this wouldn't have happened, would it, Steve?
It's a bit bizarre for the government, if that's what they would suggest, to think that the issue of the now enormous backlog of people in our system, which I completely agree with, is appalling and unhelpful to everybody, would ever be solved by some power to expel a few dozen people, probably, to Rwanda. And you know our position as Amnesty about that anyway.
Yeah.
The mere fact is this. The UK should do what generally it expects other countries to do, and indeed they do in far greater number. It keeps saying that France should take its responsibilities. Amnesty agrees with that. France should deal with people who make their asylum claims in France, as should Italy, as should Lebanon, as should all countries around the world, as should we. And the idea that somehow we will be able to pass on all of our still relatively modest responsibilities compared to those countries I've mentioned, and many others, to other places is for the birds.
I get that. I get that, what you're saying. Patrick, final word on this. One of my serious worries is that if we keep seeing cases like this, I mean, we rattled off 4 or 5 that just sprung to mind, frankly, of failed asylum seekers who've committed pretty heinous crimes, very heinous crimes in this country. If that keeps happening, then actually the potential for massive extremist far-right situations to take place could happen. I mean, is it not in everyone's interest to get to grips with this and sort out the public safety element?
Yes, I believe it is, because, whether we're the worst hit in Europe or not, and, we're not so far on the statistics, and we're an island, so you wouldn't expect us to be, the overall profile of asylum volumes is completely unsustainable. They're going up very fast in almost every single country. And we've seen from the small boats that, it's leaping ahead by tens of thousands each year. And we know, by the way, there was a leak to the Sun newspaper a couple of weeks ago that around 1,000 of the people who've come in on small boats are known by our security agencies to have serious criminal records. This is putting the British public, at risk. We had the Liverpool bomber, we had the Reading homophobic serial killer, both failed asylum seekers. We've had rapists, we've had the murder down in Bournemouth. These things are anecdotal, but as I say, the statistics on foreign national offenders prisons point to it all going the wrong way.
Just very quickly, Steve, sorry, I'm aware that I gave Patrick the first word, so it is only fair that I'll give you the last word. I can see you're itchy now, but we are a bit pressed for time, Steve. Go on, just round us off.
Let's just have our asylum system deal with people efficiently and effectively. And remember that if we make it too frightening for people to enter the system, we'll have bigger problems because people will go to ground. That won't be good for them, and it won't be good for anybody else.
Both of you, thank you very, very much. Steve Valdez-Simmons there of Amnesty International UK and journalist and former MEP Patrick O'Flynn. Right, OK, the government is to review regulations on new builds in order to combat leaky toilets. Get this, a shift in tone, ladies and gentlemen. Leaky toilets under their new 5-year green plans. The current rules see a loss of up to 400 litres a day from faulty flushes. Now, I'm going to have to rattle through this because, as ever, I've always managed to run over time catastrophically. But with me now is Andrew Montford, Deputy Director of Net Zero Watch. And reading between the lines on this, Andrew, thank you very much, am I going to get a knock on the door one day from some government inspector who's going to come and look at my bog?
It wouldn't surprise me. It's very hard to tell whether this is the government virtue signalling or whether it is actually serious. The one about leaking toilets seems to me to be, a bit of trivia. There is an issue with water shortages in the south of England. It's a problem that would be solved by building a few more reservoirs up north where I live. We've got loads of rain, and it's just not an issue at all.
Well,
go on.
Well, the fact is that we wouldn't necessarily have a problem with all this wastage water if it wasn't water companies who were wasting it all and, in the meantime, as well, dumping a load of sewage in our beauty spots.
Yeah, I mean, there are genuine issues there. I mean, water leakage is a problem. I mean, we've had decades of the water system not being maintained properly. So yeah, there's a lot of leaky water pipes, a lot of leaky sewers. That's genuine issues that need to be addressed. Coming to look at your toilet, not so much.
Yeah, seriously, ladies and gentlemen, you're going to get a knock on your door one day, supposedly, and someone's going to go, can I have a look and check that you've not just used the double flush on a number one? And just lastly, Andrew, wood-burning fires, wood-burning stoves, it's every Englishman's right, is it not, to have a wood-burning stove in their home, a wood burner to keep warm, and now these are being clamped down on.
I think this is actually a much more serious issue. People are really struggling to heat their homes as is. If they can supplement their heating with a wood-burning stove, that's really important for them. Lots of people...
Oh, no, we've lost Andrew's mic. Oh, well, Andrew, I'm very sorry to cut you off. We can't hear a word you're saying. Andrew Montfort there, Deputy Director of Net Zero Watch. However, though, it's rather good timing in a sense because it's Jubes & Co. Michelle's up next. Michelle, I better not ask you about your potential leaky loo, is that right? I'm sure you don't have a wood-burning stove and you're doing everything right for the environment.
Yes, the less said about my toilet behaviour, probably the better, I think, Patrick. Although I was finding that quite interesting because, you know, you're saying about people knocking on the door to check your toilet, knocking on the door to check your wood burner.
Yeah.
Who even answers their door these days?
Yeah.
I don't. Do you?
No, I don't. I absolutely don't, actually. And as well, I must say, like, people buzzing on to say, oh, sorry, do you mind just looking after this delivery for next door? Well, I mean, if it's anything like the mail I get, I'll probably be ticking. There you go. Michelle, thank you very, very much. Michelle Dewberry, you're on next, aren't you, for an hour or so of absolute TV
indeed.
gold?
Lots of stuff coming up. I've got Ben Habib coming up. I know he's my viewers' favourite, or one of them. Also, Kevin Craig as well. We'll be getting into, among other things, the Northern Ireland protocol. Is that finally fixed? The last time I had this pair on there, Patrick, I had to tell them off.
Oh,
so it'll be interesting to see how they get on tonight.
I'm looking forward to seeing Ben Habib's sexy wink again.
Oh, yes.
Well.
You can't unsee that, can you? Once you've seen that with the lovely love music over the top of it, you cannot unsee it.
Absolutely. It's there every time I close my eyes. Michelle, thank you very much. Michelle Dewberry with Jubes & Co. Look, loads of you have been getting in touch throughout the course of this show, and the big one for you today that popped off was indeed this failed asylum seeker who did tragically go on to kill an 88-year-old woman in her own home. I was asking, why is it taking so long to deport people who are failed asylum seekers? One email to round off the show, Linda says, as a solicitor myself, I am ashamed of and disgusted by my own profession, who for money protect individuals who should not be here. And I think that's the way we're going to finish the show today. Something to ponder on. Thank you very much. I've been Patrick Christys, and I will be back again tomorrow from 3 p.m. with another absolute rocket of a show for you. But up next is Michelle Dewberry with Jubes & Co. How's your weather?
Hello, welcome to the latest weather update with me, Annie Shuttleworth from the Met Office. Rain will continue to affect northern areas over the next few days, but we'll see further dry weather across the south. Now, high pressure is dominating across the south. That's bringing that drier, settled weather. But we've got weather fronts over the next few days into Thursday and Friday, continuing to push into the north, bringing some rain. And on Wednesday night, you can see across much of Scotland and into parts of northern England, we'll see persistent rain for a time, especially across the Highlands and Western Isles, though the winds will ease a little bit. Further south, it'll be quite dry overnight, but turning much cloudier. And with plenty of cloud around, it'll be another mild night for the time of year, frost-free by the time we get to Thursday morning. Now, remaining quite cloudy throughout Thursday across the whole of the UK, rain will become a little bit more restricted to the Highlands and western areas and northern areas of Scotland. However, there could be the odd drizzly shower affecting parts of West Wales and into the southwest too. It's going to be a milder day than Wednesday on Thursday, temperatures reaching 12 or 13 degrees, though it will be quite breezy out there. Then into Thursday evening and Friday morning, another cloudy and breezy night. This band of rain that starts off in northern Scotland will sink southwards into parts of Northern Ireland and northern England, as well as parts of North Wales too. Elsewhere, it'll be dry and cloudy and again frost-free, temperatures well above average for the time of year by the time we get to the early hours of Friday. Another cloudy start on Friday, fairly breezy, especially across coastal areas, and into the northwest you can see the next band of rain arriving. So some further rain for Friday and Saturday, but by Sunday turning a little bit cooler and a little bit brighter.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have